Sometimes violence is obvious and impossible to miss. But other times, like in this case, everything seems normal. A peaceful place, a typical day, a child where he should be. No one hears screams or sees anything amiss. There's no single moment that clearly marks the beginning of trouble. However, something has changed. When the boy doesn't return home and time passes without a word, his absence is the first sign that something is wrong. When he was found, the scene indicated a planned, barbaric act of violence. It was hard to imagine such a terrible thing could have happened to a young boy. For over a year, these details remained a mystery, with no suspect in the case stalled. It was just an incomplete pattern waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, the person responsible continued to live a normal life, far from the scene of the crime, blending in and going unnoticed. Then, the same pattern emerged again, and this time, it would be recognized. Portland, Maine, August 22, 1982. The day began without warning. 11-year-old Richard "Ricky" Stetson left his home to go jogging along the Back Cove Trail, a 3.5-mile path familiar to locals, open, visible, and considered safe. It was the kind of place where danger did not announce itself. Where a child could run alone, and no one would question it. Ricky never returned. As daylight faded, concern turned urgent. His parents called the police. Officers began canvassing the trail, retracing what should have been a simple loop. There were no immediate signs of struggle. No witnesses who could place a moment of violence. Only a gap, a stretch of time where Ricky had simply disappeared. The next day, the search ended. A motorist traveling along Interstate 295 spotted something on the roadside. It was Ricky's body. The discovery shifted the case instantly from missing person to homicide. And not a random act, something far more deliberate. According to investigative findings, the attacker had attempted to undress the boy. There were signs of control. Of escalation. Ricky had been stabbed. Strangled. And most disturbingly, bitten. The bite mark would later become one of the most critical forensic clues, a detail that suggested proximity, intensity, and a level of personal violence that investigators could not ignore. Police moved quickly. A suspect was identified and arrested. For a moment, it seemed the case might resolve itself early. But forensic analysis told a different story. The bite marks on Ricky's body did not match the suspect's teeth. The evidence failed. After approximately a year and a half in custody, the suspect was released. The case collapsed. No new leads emerged. No additional suspects surfaced. The brutality of the crime stood in contrast to the silence that followed. Investigators were left with fragments, method, injury patterns, a forensic anomaly, but no one to attach them to. And so the case went cold. What no one could yet see was that the violence in Portland was not an isolated event. It was the beginning of a pattern, one that would remain hidden, waiting, until it resurfaced more than a year later in a different state, under different circumstances, but with the same quiet precision. A line had been drawn. It just hadn't been connected yet. For nearly a year and a half after Ricky Stetson's murder, the trail went quiet. Portland investigators had exhausted what they could. The crime scene had yielded fragments, the pattern of injuries, the bite mark, the attempted undressing, all pointing to a controlled and deeply personal act of violence. But without a match, without a name, those details remained suspended in isolation. And with that, the investigation lost momentum. According to available case records, no additional viable leads emerged after that point. The file did not close, but it stopped moving. Detectives revisited evidence, re-examined statements, but nothing advanced the case forward. The killer had left behind a signature, but not an identity. Beyond Maine, life continued, Somewhere else, the man responsible for Ricky's death was still living within the structure of ordinary society. There were no alerts crossing state lines. No centralized system linking violent crimes with behavioral similarities. In the early 1980s, investigative communication between jurisdictions remained limited, often fragmented. A crime in Maine stayed in Maine, unless something unmistakable connected it outward. Nothing did. Not yet. During this period, John Joubert was moving through his own life. By late 1983, he would be stationed in Nebraska as a radar technician in the United States Air Force, living in Bellevue. At the time, there was no reason to connect him to Portland. No reason to suspect that the violence seen along Back Cove had followed him across state lines. The gap between 1982 and 1983 would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Because it suggested control. The absence of known crimes did not necessarily mean the absence of intent. It raised questions investigators would only ask later. Had the killer stopped, or simply waited? Was the first murder an isolated act, or the beginning of something rehearsed, refined, and postponed? There were no answers yet. Only distance, time, and a false sense that whatever had happened in Portland had ended there. It hadn't. More than a year later, in a quiet suburb hundreds of miles away, the pattern would return, not as a coincidence, but as a continuation. And this time, it would not remain hidden for long. On September 18, 1983, more than a year after the murder of Ricky Stetson, violence erupted again in Bellevue, Nebraska, but no one realized it at the time. 13-year-old Danny Joe Eberly stepped out early that morning to deliver newspapers along his regular route. It was routine work. Predictable. The kind of responsibility is entrusted to a teenager in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He followed the same path he always did. Then, somewhere between deliveries, the routine broke. When Danny failed to return home, concern began to build. His family retraced his route. Neighbors were asked. The area was checked. And then, a critical detail emerged. Danny's bicycle was found abandoned near one of his delivery stops. It was not hidden. Not damaged. Just left behind, as if the moment had been interrupted. According to investigation records, there were no clear signs of a struggle at the scene. No immediate witnesses who could explain what had happened in that narrow window of time. The disappearance was clean, controlled. Police responded quickly. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, gathering fragments of memory. But the morning had been quiet. Too quiet. Nothing stood out. Search teams expanded outward. Fields. Roadsides. Wooded areas. Each hour without answers deepened the urgency. 3 days later, the search ended. Danny's body was discovered in a remote area outside Bellevue. The condition of the body immediately shifted the case from abduction to something far more disturbing. According to publicly available investigative findings, the victim had been bound and subjected to multiple stab wounds. There were indications of control, deliberate actions that suggested the attacker had taken time, not acted in panic. The violence was structured. Investigators began building a profile. The offender had approached without drawing attention. Had gained compliance quickly. Had removed the victim from a public area without witnesses. And then carried out the attack in isolation. It pointed to someone organized. Someone who understood timing, visibility, and risk. At this stage, the case was treated as a local homicide. There was no confirmed link to Portland, Maine. No shared suspect. No cross-state coordination that would tie Danny Eberly's death to Ricky Stetson's murder. But the similarities were there, waiting. A young boy. Alone. Approached in a routine setting. Controlled. Moved. killed with a mix of restraint and escalation. The pattern had not changed, only the location. And as investigators worked to understand what had happened to Danny, they had no way of knowing that this was not the end of the violence in Nebraska, but the beginning of a sequence that would soon make the invisible unmistakable. Papillion, Nebraska. On December 2, 1983, winter had settled over the suburbs. The air was colder now. Streets quieter. Daylight shorter. But routine remained, and routine, once again, would be exploited. 12-year-old Christopher Walden left his home that day and never made it back. At first, the disappearance felt familiar in a way no one wanted to admit. A boy is gone. No immediate witnesses. No clear explanation. But this time, something was different. The memory of Danny Eberly was still fresh. When Christopher failed to return, the response was faster. Sharper. Families in the area had already begun to sense that something was wrong in their community. Parents were more alert. Police moved with greater urgency. Search teams were deployed almost immediately. Within 2 days, the worst was confirmed. Christopher's body was found in a rural area not far from where he had last been seen. The condition of the scene and the injuries inflicted revealed details that investigators could not ignore. According to investigative findings, the victim had been bound. There were stab wounds. The pattern, once again, suggested control. A sequence. A method. Now there were two. In Nebraska, 2 boys. The same age. Both were abducted in ordinary moments. Both were quickly taken away from public places. Both were later found in remote locations. Both were subjected to deliberate violence. The probability of coincidence collapsed. Investigators began formally considering what had been only a possibility weeks earlier. They were dealing with a serial offender. The pressure intensified. Task forces expanded. Patrols increased. Residents were warned. Parents kept children inside. Schools became cautious environments. The sense of safety that once defined Bellevue and its surrounding areas began to erode. But the most critical shift happened inside the investigation itself. Detectives started to look not just for evidence, but for patterns of behavior. Someone who moved through the community unnoticed. Someone who could approach children without raising alarm. Someone patient. Someone local. At the same time, questions began to surface that reached beyond Nebraska. The similarities between the 2 cases were too strong to dismiss. And for some investigators, there was a growing, unspoken concern. If this offender had done it twice here, had he done it before somewhere else? The answer existed. But it had not yet been connected. Somewhere within the same quiet neighborhoods now gripped by fear, the man responsible was still living his daily life. Observing. Waiting. Blending in. And as the investigation widened, it was not a major breakthrough that would change everything, but something smaller. By early January 1984, the investigation had reached a critical point. No suspect had been named. And yet, the pattern was undeniable. Police began narrowing their focus, not on strangers passing through, but on individuals embedded within the community. The offender, by all indications, was someone who understood the environment, someone who could move without attracting attention. Someone ordinary. That shift changed everything. Investigators started re-examining small details. Reports that had seemed insignificant. Observations that did not initially fit. Among them, one stood out. A neighbor had noticed a man. He was quiet. Reserved. He lived nearby. Nothing overtly suspicious, but there was something off in his behavior. Subtle inconsistencies. The kind that are easy to ignore, until context gives them weight. The man was identified as John Joubert. At the time, Joubert was serving in the United States Air Force, stationed at Offutt Air Force Base. He worked as a radar technician. His life, on the surface, was structured and disciplined. He lived alone, kept to himself. No criminal record that immediately raised an alarm. But as investigators looked closer, small details began to accumulate. According to investigative records, Joubert had been seen in areas near where Christopher Walden disappeared. His routines placed him within proximity of key locations, not constantly, not obviously, but enough to matter. Surveillance began. Officers observed his movements, his habits, his interactions, or lack of them. What they saw was not overtly incriminating, but it was consistent with the emerging profile: controlled, solitary, methodical. Then came a critical moment. On January 11, 1984, Joubert was stopped by police under circumstances that, at first glance, seemed minor. A routine interaction. But during that stop, officers noted items and behavior that did not align cleanly with his explanation of events. It was enough. The following day, January 12, 1984, John Joubert was taken into custody. What followed was the turning point investigators had been waiting for. Inside Joubert's possession, and through subsequent searches, authorities began uncovering elements that aligned with the crimes. Materials, writings, indicators of violent fantasy and control. Nothing singularly definitive at first, but together, they formed a pattern. A pattern that matched the crimes. For the first time since August 1982, the investigation had a name. A face. A focal point. But even then, the full scope of what Joubert had done was not yet clear. Because as investigators began to question him, they would uncover something far more disturbing than 2 murders in Nebraska. They would uncover a past that reached beyond state lines, back to a case that had long gone cold. And with it, the realization that the pattern had never started in Nebraska, it had only surfaced there. The arrest itself was quiet. There were no sirens. No public confrontation. John Joubert was taken into custody with the same controlled restraint that had defined the investigation leading up to that moment. To an outside observer, it might have seemed routine: another man questioned, another lead being pursued. But inside the interrogation room, the direction of the case began to shift. At first, Joubert did not present as overtly unstable. He was composed, soft-spoken. His demeanor aligned with the life he appeared to lead: a disciplined Air Force radar technician, structured, precise, and outwardly unremarkable. But as questioning progressed, inconsistencies began to surface. According to investigative records, Joubert's statements did not fully align with known timelines. There were gaps, subtle contradictions, details that seemed rehearsed, but not entirely consistent under pressure. Investigators pressed carefully, aware that they were close, but not yet certain. Authorities executed warrants tied to Joubert's residence and personal belongings. What they found did not immediately resolve the case, but it deepened suspicion. There were items that suggested fixation, materials linked to violent fantasy, control, and domination. Notes and writings that, while not direct confessions, reflected an internal world far removed from his outward persona. It was no longer just circumstantial proximity. It was behavioral alignment. At the same time, physical evidence began to take shape. Fibers, tools, and environmental traces were examined against the known crime scenes. Each element on its own was limited, but together, they formed a growing structure, one that increasingly pointed back to Joubert. Under continued interrogation, the pressure mounted. And then, the break came, and Joubert began to talk. He admitted to the killings of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden. The details he provided, locations, methods, sequence, aligned with the evidence investigators had already gathered. It was not a vague admission. It was specific, controlled, almost clinical. But the most significant moment came next. He spoke of another victim. A boy in Maine. Richard "Ricky" Stetson. With that statement, a case that had remained unresolved for over a year suddenly reconnected. The geographic gap collapsed. The pattern was no longer theoretical, it was confirmed. One offender. Multiple states. Multiple victims. The investigation had moved from suspicion to certainty. But as Joubert's confessions continued, investigators began to understand something more unsettling than the crimes themselves, the structure behind them. And to fully understand it, they would have to look beyond what Joubert had done, and into why. After John Joubert started confessing, the investigation changed from piecing together what happened to understanding why it happened. They were organized, intentional, and profoundly disturbing. According to interrogation records and later psychological evaluations, Joubert described urges that had developed long before the murders in Nebraska. These were not sudden impulses. They were persistent thoughts, shaped over time, centered on control, domination, and violent fantasy. The acts themselves, as he explained, were not random expressions of anger. They were, in his own words, something he felt compelled to carry out. Investigators noted the precision in how he spoke. There was little visible emotion. No outward panic. Joubert described his actions with a level of detachment that suggested distance, as if recounting a sequence rather than confronting the weight of it. He explained how he approached his victims, how he gained control, and how he transported them. Each step followed a pattern. Control was central. The bindings. The isolation of the locations. The escalation of violence. These were not incidental details, they were part of a process. According to case records, Joubert admitted to deriving a sense of power from the acts, particularly in moments where the victim's autonomy was completely removed. The bite marks, first seen in the murder of Ricky Stetson, also took on new meaning. They were not accidental. They were part of the ritual, a physical imprint, an assertion of dominance that investigators later understood as deeply symbolic within Joubert's psychological framework. His writings reinforced this. Materials recovered from his possession revealed violent fantasies that mirrored aspects of the crimes. Themes of control, submission, and repetition appeared consistently. These were not isolated thoughts. They were rehearsals. Yet, outside of this internal world, Joubert maintained a different identity. He thrived in organized settings like the military, where routine and discipline were key. To others, he seemed quiet and reserved. Nothing obviously indicated he was capable of the crimes he committed. This contrast, the difference between his normal appearance and his hidden, driving urges, was one of the most unsettling parts of the case. Psychological experts later examined whether Joubert met the criteria for specific disorders. While interpretations varied, there was general agreement that his behavior aligned with patterns seen in organized offenders, individuals capable of planning, controlling, and repeating acts while maintaining a stable external life. But even with analysis, one element remained difficult to quantify. Why did he stop, and then start again? The gap between Maine and Nebraska suggested restraint. The return suggested inevitability. For investigators, the confessions provided answers. But they also exposed limits, the recognition that understanding motive does not always lead to understanding origin. What remained was a clear sequence of actions, a confirmed pattern, and a man who had carried it out with intention. The courtroom became the final place where the pattern would be laid out, not as fragments, but as a complete sequence. John Joubert stood trial in Nebraska for the murders of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden. By this stage, the investigation had already established a strong foundation. His confessions, corroborated by physical evidence and supported by the consistency of his own statements. The strategy of the defense did not center on denying the acts. Instead, it turned toward his state of mind. Attorneys argued that Joubert suffered from mental illness, that his actions were the result of psychological disturbance rather than calculated intent. It was an effort to shift the case away from premeditated murder and toward diminished responsibility, a critical distinction in determining sentencing. But the prosecution presented a different narrative. They emphasized planning, control, sequence. Joubert had selected victims in routine settings, approached without drawing attention, removed them efficiently, transported them, bound them, killed them in isolated locations. These were not the actions of someone acting in confusion or panic. They were structured, deliberate. The jury was asked to consider not just what Joubert had done, but how he had done it. In the end, they found him guilty. Joubert was sentenced to death. In a separate legal process, Joubert also confessed to the 1982 murder of Ricky Stetson in Maine, formally closing a case that had remained unresolved for over a year. What had once been an isolated tragedy in Portland was now understood as the first known act in a series. One offender, 3 victims, 2 states. On July 17, 1996, John Joubert was executed in the state of Nebraska. For the families of the victims, the execution marked an end to the legal process, but not to the loss. The absence left behind by each child could not be resolved in a courtroom. What remained were memories and the quiet weight of what had been taken. Beyond the families, the case left a broader impact. It exposed the limits of communication between jurisdictions at the time. A murder in Maine had not been connected to crimes in Nebraska until the offender himself revealed the link. It highlighted the importance of forensic detail. A single bite mark had prevented a wrongful conviction, even as the real killer remained free. And perhaps most unsettling, it revealed how easily violence could exist behind an ordinary exterior. John Joubert was not hidden in isolation. He lived among others, worked within structured systems, followed routines. And yet, within that normalcy, he carried something else entirely, something that only became visible after it had already taken lives. The case closed with certainty. It raised important questions. How can we better detect potential problems? How can we prevent them from happening? And how well do we really know the people in our lives? In a city where nothing ever truly stops, there are moments when everything goes quiet, so quiet that no one realizes something is wrong until it's already too late. Some stories don't begin with violence. They begin with a decision, one that seems small, necessary, even harmless at the time. For Catherine Woods, that decision was leaving everything behind. At just 17, she walked away from Ohio with a single goal: to make it to Broadway. She had the discipline, the talent, and the determination to get there. And for a while, it looked like everything was going exactly as planned. But New York has a way of demanding more than ambition. And slowly, almost invisibly, Catherine began building a life no one else could fully see. A life that would eventually lead her somewhere she never intended to go. Because by November 27, 2005, that quiet, carefully constructed world was about to collapse. The story starts not with violence, but with Catherine Woods leaving Ohio. At 17, Catherine, a dedicated dancer, left her home state. Years of training had shaped her, and she was determined to reach Broadway. Fame wasn't her goal, but the chance to use her talent and hard work on a real stage was. New York City held that opportunity. Her parents supported her move, both proud and worried. Those close to the family said they understood how demanding the city could be. Catherine quickly learned to be independent, but also faced new risks. Still, she felt prepared. Initially, she stayed on track. Her days were packed with classes and auditions, moving, practicing, getting rejected, and trying again. Friends remembered her focus, seeing progress in every small step. She was determined, not reckless. But determination alone couldn't pay the bills. Living in Manhattan was expensive, and the costs piled up. Training and simply surviving both required money. Like many young performers, she took on multiple jobs. Eventually, she made a secret decision. She began working as an exotic dancer, using a stage name to keep it separate from her previous life. This decision changed everything. Emotionally, it created a divide within her. By day, she still pursued her Broadway dream. By night, she worked a different kind of stage, focused on survival. Catherine's personal life became complicated. She lived with her boyfriend, David Hahn, whom she knew from Ohio. However, their relationship was unstable, marked by financial pressures, emotional strain, and frequent arguments. Their future together seemed uncertain. Then Paul Cortez appeared. She met Cortez at her gym. He was well-educated, calm, and appeared successful, a different kind of man who offered a different kind of future. Their relationship developed discreetly, alongside her existing one with David. She was involved with two men, leading two different lives, creating a precarious situation. To the world, Catherine Wood seemed like a young woman building a life in New York City, but underneath, her life was becoming increasingly strained. In late November 2005, Catherine Wood's life changed forever. She died in her small Upper East Side apartment in Manhattan. The exact details and timeline of her death were unclear at the time. A key question emerged: when someone's life falls apart, what breaks first, and who is there to witness it? By 2005, Catherine was living a double life, neither of which felt complete or secure. During the day, she was the young woman her family knew, dedicated to her dance career and determined to make it on Broadway. She had moved from Ohio to New York to pursue this dream. At night, she transformed. Using a different name, Catherine worked as an exotic dancer in Manhattan. The environment was both controlled and unpredictable, filled with lights, music, and performance, but also close contact with strangers and blurred boundaries. The investigation suggested that this work was a matter of survival, a way to pay rent and support her dreams. Many performers in New York make similar compromises. However, for Catherine, it created a divide between who she was and who she felt she needed to be. She hid this part of her life from her family completely. They believed she was progressing and building a stable future. They were unaware of the growing pressure she faced, the late nights, the exhaustion, and the difficult choices she made between her ambitions and her needs. Meanwhile, her personal life was also under strain. Her relationship with David Hahn, her roommate, was deteriorating. They lacked stability, argued frequently, and struggled with money and trust. Their once strong connection was fading. Despite this, she stayed with him. At the same time, she was developing a new relationship with Paul Cortez, a gym trainer who was intelligent and well-spoken. According to the case file, their relationship began discreetly, with messages and meetings, offering her a sense of escape from her chaotic life. However, secrecy has its burdens. Maintaining two relationships demanded careful planning, timing, and silence. A single mistake could ruin everything. This pressure began to show. Investigators later found communications suggesting emotional strain and potential conflict, although interpretations of these details varied. Two men existed in parallel. Neither was fully aware of the other, at least not at first. This was the fracture point. Catherine was no longer just balancing work and ambition. She was balancing truth itself. What she revealed. What she concealed. What she hoped would never collide. And then, according to the timeline later reconstructed by investigators, the lines began to blur. Conversations changed. Emotions sharpened. The structure she had carefully maintained started to destabilize. No single moment announced it. No clear warning sign. Just a gradual tightening of pressure, quiet, invisible, but constant. Until one night, everything would converge. Because on November 27, 2005, inside that Upper East Side apartment, the separation between her two worlds would disappear completely, and what remained would not be performance, or ambition, or survival. It would be evidence. When two lives collide without warning, what survives, and what is left behind for investigators to piece together? It began with silence. On November 27, 2005, Catherine Woods did not answer her phone. She did not return messages. For someone balancing multiple jobs and relationships, a delay was not unusual. But this time, something felt different. According to the investigation, the silence stretched longer than it should have. Inside her Upper East Side apartment, time had already stopped. The discovery came through David Hahn. He later told investigators that he had been unable to reach her. Concern turned into urgency. When he arrived at the apartment, what he found would immediately shift the case from concern to homicide. Catherine Woods was lying on the floor. Unresponsive. The scene was violent, far beyond anything accidental. Factually, the medical examiner would later confirm she had been stabbed multiple times. The injuries were severe, deliberate. There was no indication of forced entry. No immediate sign of a struggle spilling beyond the apartment. Emotionally, the scene carried a different weight. It suggested proximity. Familiarity. This was not random. Police arrived quickly. The apartment was secured. The first layer of investigation began, not with answers, but with containment. Officers documented the scene. Blood patterns. Position of the body. Objects in the room. Every detail mattered now. And one detail stood out immediately. David Hahn was the one who found her. In cases like this, investigators often begin with those closest to the victim. It is not an assumption, it is a procedure. Statistically, proximity matters. Relationships matter. And David was both present and connected. He became the first focus. According to investigative accounts, his behavior, his timeline, and his statements were examined closely. Where had he been? When was the last time he saw Catherine alive? Were there signs of conflict between them? Their strained relationship did not go unnoticed. At the same time, the apartment itself began to speak. Meanwhile, the apartment seemed to tell its own story. There was no evidence of a break-in. This implied Catherine either knew her attacker or the person had a key. Detectives observed that the violence felt personal, deliberate, yet extremely forceful. The type of wound suggested the attack happened up close. The room felt charged with the aftermath of something abrupt, emotional, and final. Who was close to Catherine, and angry enough, to commit such a crime? As investigators pieced together the timeline, another detail surfaced. Catherine's phone records. Her recent communications. The people she had been in contact with in the hours leading up to her death. At first, these were just data points. Names. Numbers. Timestamps. But hidden within them was a connection that would soon redirect the entire investigation. Because Catherine Woods had not been living a single life. And now, as detectives widened their lens beyond the apartment, they began to realize something critical. There was more than one man in her story. If the first suspect was too obvious, then who else had a reason to be there that night, and why had they not come forward? In the first hours of a homicide investigation, clarity is rare. But direction is not. From the moment Catherine Woods was found, David Hahn stood at the center of that direction. Not because he was proven guilty, but because he was closest. He lived with her. He found her. And according to standard investigative procedure, proximity demands scrutiny. Detectives began with his timeline. Where had he been that night? When had he last seen Catherine alive? His answers, according to the case file, were consistent, but consistency alone is not confirmation. Investigators cross-checked his statements against phone records, witness accounts, and any available surveillance. His alibi had to be solid. Was he simply a witness, or was he involved in something more? His relationship with Catherine became a key area of focus. Friends and acquaintances described tension between them. Arguments, financial strain, emotional instability. Nothing uncommon in isolation, but in the context of a violent death, every fracture matters. Investigators examined whether those tensions could have escalated into something irreversible. At the same time, physical evidence was processed. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. This detail reinforced an early working theory: Catherine had known her attacker. Someone she trusted enough to let inside. Or someone who already belonged there. That assumption kept David in focus. Forensic teams collected fingerprints, blood samples, and trace evidence from the scene. Each piece would either support or dismantle the initial hypothesis. Detectives waited for lab results while continuing to question those closest to Catherine. But something did not fully align. According to investigative accounts, certain elements of the timeline began to resist a simple explanation. The estimated time of death. The sequence of events. The physical evidence did not immediately point in a single, clear direction. And then there was behavior. David had called for help. He had not fled. He had remained present. These actions do not eliminate suspicion, but they complicate it. Investigators had to consider not just what was possible, but what was consistent with the evidence. Slowly, the focus began to shift, not away from him entirely, but outward. Because Catherine's life, as detectives were beginning to understand, extended beyond that apartment. Beyond that relationship. Beyond what was immediately visible. Her phone records were analyzed more closely. Numbers repeated. Calls are made late at night. Messages were exchanged with someone who had not yet been fully identified within the scope of the investigation. A second presence began to take shape, not in the room, but in the data. This was the first crack in the initial theory. David Hahn remained under scrutiny. His role was not dismissed. But investigators were no longer certain he was the only answer. And in homicide investigations, uncertainty is not a setback, it is a doorway. Because once detectives looked beyond the obvious, they found something else waiting. Another man. Another connection. Another possible truth. If the first suspect did not fully explain the crime, then who was the person hidden in Catherine's final hours, and why had they remained in the background? The shift did not happen all at once. It began quietly, with a number. As investigators expanded their focus beyond David Hahn, Catherine Woods' phone records became a central thread. Calls, messages, time stamps, each one a fragment of her final days. And within that data, one name appeared with increasing frequency. Paul Cortez. He was not part of Catherine's public life. Not someone her family knew. Not someone immediately visible in her daily routine. But according to the investigation, his presence in her communications was consistent and recent. Detectives started a more thorough investigation. Paul Cortez was a personal trainer, educated, and married. He seemed to live a stable life. His background didn't immediately suggest he was capable of violence. However, cases are built on evidence, not just appearances. His connection to Catherine was becoming increasingly significant. Investigators discovered that they had developed a secret relationship over time. Their messages indicated a strong emotional bond, possibly romantic. While the nature of their relationship would later be debated in court, it was clear they were close and in frequent contact, making him part of Catherine's close circle. He had communicated with her shortly before she died. As the investigation focused on him, a new possibility emerged. Had their hidden relationship turned dangerous? Detectives pieced together the timeline of events. Where was Cortez on the night of November 27th? His initial statements didn't initially seem suspicious. But, like all suspects, his statements needed verification using phone records, location data, and physical evidence. Gradually, inconsistencies began to appear. These inconsistencies weren't enough to prove guilt, but they were enough to cast doubt on his story. Investigators examined the nature of his relationship with Catherine. Was it mutual? Was there tension? Was there conflict that had escalated? These questions did not yet have definitive answers, but they pointed toward motive, the element that transforms presence into possibility. A stark contrast emerged. Catherine had two men in her life. One was known, the other secret. One was already a suspect, the other newly revealed. As the investigation expanded, attention shifted. David Hahn was no longer the only focus. Cortez was now a factor in an increasingly complex puzzle. A crucial breakthrough occurred. Forensic analysis of the apartment began yielding results. Physical evidence collected at the scene was being analyzed. Among the findings was something that promised to ground suspicion in concrete evidence, rather than just speculation. A mark. Left at the scene. Difficult to dismiss. It wasn't a final conclusion, but it provided a new avenue of inquiry. In homicide investigations, relationships suggest possibilities, but evidence reveals the truth. Paul Cortez was no longer just a name. He was now a person of interest. If a secret relationship placed him with Catherine before her death, what physical evidence proved he was in her apartment, and what transpired there? The case now hinged not on suspicion, but on physical evidence. In Catherine Wood's apartment, investigators gathered crucial silent evidence: blood patterns, undisturbed objects, and a notable bloody handprint. This handprint, distinct enough to preserve and analyze, initially seemed like another piece of forensic material. However, lab analysis transformed it into a potential clue to the identity of the perpetrator. Fingerprint comparisons began. The handprint didn't match Catherine Wood's or David Hahn's prints. This discovery didn't solve the case, but it cast doubt on the initial suspects and suggested a different direction for the investigation. Then, a match was found. Investigators determined that the handprint was consistent with Paul Cortez's. This forensic evidence placed him inside the apartment, significantly shifting the focus of the investigation. If Cortez was present, what transpired in Catherine Wood's final moments? Cortez's status immediately changed. No longer a marginal figure, he was now directly connected to the crime scene. His previous statements, timeline, and proximity to the victim were all re-evaluated in light of this new evidence. At the same time, digital evidence began to align. Phone records placed him in communication with Catherine shortly before her death. The timing, according to investigators, was critical. It suggested not just a relationship, but recent contact, possibly leading up to the moment itself. Step by step, the narrative tightened. Investigators considered the sequence: entry, interaction, escalation. The absence of forced entry remained significant. Catherine had likely allowed her attacker inside. The violence suggested something personal, something that had intensified quickly. But the motive remained complex. Was this jealousy? A confrontation? A breakdown in a hidden relationship? According to court proceedings later, these questions would be argued, interpreted, and challenged. Not every detail was universally agreed upon. But the physical evidence, the handprint, did not carry interpretation. It carried presence. And presence is difficult to dispute. Cortez was questioned again. His explanations, according to reports, attempted to account for the evidence. But investigators were no longer working from theory. They were working from the trace. Then came the decisive moment. With forensic results, timeline reconstruction, and communication records aligning, authorities moved forward. Cortez was arrested and charged in connection with Catherine Wood's murder. The case, once uncertain, had found direction. But direction is not resolution. Because in court, evidence is not just presented, it is contested. Every detail is examined, challenged, and reframed. What seems clear in an investigation can become uncertain under scrutiny. And Cortez would not accept the narrative being built around him. If the evidence placed him at the scene, then could it fully explain what happened, or would the courtroom reveal a different version of the truth? The courtroom does not search for truth. It tests it. When Paul Cortez stood trial, the case that investigators had built entered a different environment, one defined not by discovery, but by argument. Every piece of evidence would now be examined from two opposing directions. What the prosecution saw as certainty, the defense would attempt to fracture. At the center of the trial was the physical evidence. The bloody handprint recovered from Catherine Wood's apartment became one of the prosecution's strongest points. Forensic experts testified that it matched Cortez, placing him at the scene during or around the time of a presence that was difficult to explain away. Alongside this, phone records and communication logs established that he had been in contact with Catherine shortly before her death. The prosecution's narrative was direct. They argued that Cortez had gone to Catherine's apartment, that an encounter had escalated, and that the violence that followed was deliberate. The absence of forced entry supported the idea that Catherine had let him in. The number and severity of the wounds suggested intensity, something beyond accident or self-defense. But the defense pushed back. Cortez did not deny knowing Catherine. He did not deny contact. But according to defense arguments, the interpretation of the evidence was incomplete. They questioned how and when the handprint had been left. They raised doubts about the exact sequence of events. They challenged whether the prosecution had proven motive beyond speculation. In criminal trials, doubt is not a weakness. It is a strategy. Witnesses were called. Experts testified. Timelines were reconstructed again, this time under cross-examination. Each side attempted to shape the same set of facts into different conclusions. And at the center of it all was Catherine. Her life, her relationships, her choices, presented not as a story, but as evidence. A young woman whose final moments were now being interpreted in fragments, each one carrying legal significance. Then came the decision. After deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Paul Cortez was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court concluded that the evidence, particularly the forensic link and the surrounding circumstances, was sufficient to establish his responsibility. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The case, in legal terms, was resolved. But a resolution in court does not always settle every question. Because Cortez maintained his innocence, he would later seek a new trial, arguing that aspects of the case had been mishandled or misunderstood. These claims, while part of the legal process, did not overturn the conviction. Still, they left a shadow. If a verdict closes a case, why do some stories refuse to stay closed, and what remains unresolved beneath the surface of a conviction? The case ended in a courtroom. But the story did not end there. The verdict offered Catherine Wood's family some closure, but not peace. Her life, once full of discipline and dreams, ended tragically and far from home. After the trial, her parents had to piece together not just the circumstances of her death, but also aspects of her life they hadn't known. Catherine had been living a secret life, hidden from even her closest family. Their grief was mixed with the unsettling realization of how much can be concealed, even within a family, and how difficult it is to truly understand someone's life from afar. They preferred to remember her as she was before she moved to New York, a dancer, focused and full of hope. This image of her, untainted by the struggles that marked her final years, became a precious memory, a comforting constant in the face of the complicated truth that emerged after her death. However, the impact of the case lingered. Paul Cortez, convicted and sentenced, did not accept the outcome as final. According to legal filings, he sought a new trial, arguing that aspects of the evidence and proceedings had been flawed or insufficiently examined. These claims did not overturn the conviction, but they kept the case alive in another form, within appeals, within legal argument, within unresolved interpretation. And this is where the certainty begins to soften. Because while the court established responsibility, motive remained less clearly defined. Investigators and prosecutors suggested emotional conflict, possibly tied to the hidden relationship. But not every detail was conclusively established. Some elements, timing, escalation, intent, were reconstructed from evidence, not witnessed directly. This is the nature of many cases. Evidence builds a structure strong enough for conviction. But it does not always answer every question. The apartment on the Upper East Side returned to silence. The physical space where everything ended no longer held investigators, only absence. Yet what happened there continued to exist, in records, in testimony, in memory. And beyond the legal outcome, the case leaves something broader. A reflection on vulnerability. On the hidden pressures of survival in a city that demands more than it gives. On the risks that emerge not from strangers in the dark, but from relationships formed in proximity, trusted, complicated, and sometimes misunderstood. Catherine Woods came to New York to build a future. She adapted. She endured. She navigated choices that many never saw. And in the end, her story became something else, a case studied, argued, and remembered, not just for how it ended, but for how it unfolded. Because beneath every verdict lies a quieter question. When all the evidence has been presented, what parts of the truth remain just out of reach, and who continues to carry them? Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the heartbreaking case of a beautiful woman, Julie Scully. Julie Marie Scully, an American woman, gave up everything to pursue love, but just a few months later, her body was found in a horrific state in a remote lake in Turkey. What turned her beautiful life into an international sensation case? Let's follow the case today. Julie was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. To understand her story better, let's consider her parents' situation. Julia was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation in New Mexico, home to the second largest Native American tribe in the United States. Life on the reservation was extremely challenging, with no electricity or running water and limited job opportunities due to widespread alcoholism. Many residents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. At the age of 12, Julia's parents sent her to a boarding school to help her learn English and adapt to life outside the reservation. After moving to the city, she began to fit in as an average American and found work at a mental health facility. However, she became addicted to substances. Later, Julia met a police officer named John, They got married just 2 days before the one-year anniversary of their meeting. John took a job as a patrolman in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. In January 1969, Julia became pregnant, and they welcomed their daughter, Julie. As Julie grew, she formed a very close bond with her father, and relatives noted that she would do anything to earn his approval. Father and daughter spent a lot of time together fishing, while Julia often felt sidelined in family life. During these times, she struggled with feelings of being an outsider. Although Julia hid her substance addiction, her erratic behavior raised concerns among those around her. Things worsened as Julia began to use more potent illegal additives. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, Julie's brother, John Patrick Scully, was born. The new baby quickly became the center of attention for their parents, leaving Julie feeling unloved and neglected. Meanwhile, Julia's substance abuse continued, and she fell into a deep depression. In 1973, overwhelmed, she took an entire pack of sleeping pills. Fortunately, John found her in time, administered first aid, and called for medical help. Julia was revived, but not only did the family learn of her addiction, the situation deteriorated further. She began to resemble a shell of her former self. Soon after, Julia attempted self-harm again due to depression, but this time, she also was saved. The issues between her parents did not go unnoticed by their children, especially by Julie, who was 9 years old at the time. During her birthday party, friends gathered to celebrate, but in the middle of the festivities, their father left to see his mistress. He had been having an affair for a while, viewing it as an escape from his growing disgust for his dependent wife. He stayed with Julia only for the sake of the children. During the party, the mistress arrived at their home to pick up John, and Julie saw her leaving with him. He seemed completely unconcerned that his secret was now obvious. This revelation hit Julie hard, and Julia began to blame herself for the situation. Julia struggled to understand what was really happening. During this time, Julie had once been an excellent student, started to fall to a C average in school. John then decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington. In here, Julie, a bright and beautiful girl, became very popular, but also fell in with a bad crowd. She started skipping school, and her grades continued to decline. By this time, she was 12 years old and already looked attractive, attracting the attention of many boys. All this was aggravated by the fact that their family lived in a disadvantaged area, which made her parents increasingly afraid for Julie, fearing she could become a victim of the addiction. One evening, Julie's friends were supposed to spend the night, but when the mother came to check on them, the schoolgirls were not in the room. Concerned, Julia contacted emergency services, and the police eventually located them in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother was deteriorating, resulting in frequent arguments. Her rebellious behavior also troubled her father. Julia entered treatment for her addiction. During Julia's absence, the home environment became more peaceful. However, despite Julie's early attempts to please her father, her rebellious nature intensified. She continued to skip classes and perform poorly academically due to spending more time with friends. When John learned of this, he was very upset. At the age of 14, Julie informed her father that she wanted to drop out of school. This decision likely stemmed from her feeling ignored by her parents. She was attractive and often the center of attention at parties, making her prioritize fun over her father's approval. By the age of 14, Julie had started living a sexual life. After graduating from high school, her parents began considering her future and special education needs. John helped her gain admission to a prestigious engineering school, known for its strict selection process. He personally spoke to the director to ensure she would be accepted without facing competition, emphasizing that she was the daughter of an indigenous person, which he hoped would earn her some concessions. In the fall of 1983, his efforts succeeded, and Julie enrolled in the engineering program. Meanwhile, her brother chose a different path. He joined the Navy as soon as he turned 16. During this time, Julie decided she was content with her life and dropped out of school to pursue financial independence. She began working and soon met a boyfriend. He was 6 years older than her. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married in November 1985, just a few months before Julie turned 18. Although marrying provided her with financial support and emotional stability, their union was kept secret, even from her father. When John eventually found out, he supported the marriage, believing it was a better choice for Julie than living with a dependent parent. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in 1988, and Julie had to move back in with her mother. Despite finding a new job, she did not contribute to her mother's living expenses. Julie became more beautiful than ever, attracting attention every time she was in public. Many people even mistook her for a model and often asked if she was one. Over time, she started to leverage her beauty. Though she felt fragile and vulnerable inside, she was desperately searching for love, but only found brief connections. Many men invited her out on dates and to various events. This trend continued in July 1989, when she attended a stylish party at a yacht owners club. There, she met Timothy "Tim" Nist, a man 11 years her senior. He was a successful businessman who owned his own yacht. In the early 1980s, he started a landscape design company, and his business thrived during the boom of the U.S. real estate market. Julie and Tim's relationship progressed rapidly, but it soon became evident that Julie was very jealous. One day, when Tim was at a bar with another girl, Julie arrived and immediately hit him, leaving a bruise on his face. She also attacked the girl, who was actually Tim's longtime secretary and just an employee helping with the business. Although the situation was tense, the conflict was eventually resolved. Besides, Julie aspired to be a model and saw an advertisement for a beauty contest in a newspaper. Eager to participate, she and Tim gathered her best photos to submitted them to the magazine hosting the contest. Unfortunately, they later discovered that the contest was a scam. The magazine used fake ads to collect free photos for their men's section, which was on the last page. One day, Tim arrived at his office to find his secretary absent. To his surprise, Julie was sitting at her desk with a friendly smile, claiming that the secretary would no longer come to work and that Julie had taken over her job. This arrangement allowed Julie to work from home, giving her more freedom and financial independence. Meanwhile, she kept checking her email to see if another magazine had responded to the beauty pageant, but there was no response at all, which made her very frustrated. Eventually, feeling cheated out of her prize, she went to a magazine's office and confronted the editor, demanding an explanation for the lack of recognition for her supposed win. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to include them in the next issue. Julie told everyone about what happened and began to prepare for the competition, which later took place in an elite hotel. At the contest, 12 finalists participated, including Julie. Unfortunately, the judges selected other contestants and only one person voted for her. Despite this setback, Julie formed a friendship with Cheryl Chuplis Hood, the magazine editor, and became this magazine's face, appearing on billboards throughout the city. This exposure increased her popularity, leading to numerous modeling job offers. Julie quickly gained fame, and her career flourished until the fall of 1990. She continued to work for SEMA while winning awards in smaller beauty contests. However, failures awaited her on the big podium. On November 16, 1991, Julie married Tim when she was 23 years old. They enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and did not deny themselves anything until 1997. Julie's modeling career continued to grow, leading to more income and television appearances. However, she also began to struggle with alcohol abuse. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but overall, they shared love and understanding. Tim wanted children, and they had the financial means to support a family, but Julie was hesitant, fearing it might jeopardize her modeling career. In February 1995, she became pregnant. Despite her friends' concerns, she continued to drink and smoke during this time. On November 26, 1996, she gave birth to a daughter named Katie, which profoundly transformed her life, which Julie willingly accepted. During this time, Julia overcame her addictions and started to actively support her granddaughter. However, they frequently argued about parenting. Soon after, Julie began to struggle with postpartum depression, feeling unhappy because her pregnancy had affected her figure. She became withdrawn and didn't make an effort to return to her former self. Around the same time, her relationship with Tim started to deteriorate, especially in April of that year. They were compelled to see a family psychologist. Julie felt that the therapist favored Tim, but the therapist was actually trying to help her confront her issues and past traumas. Ultimately, the psychologist concluded that Tim was not spending enough time with Julie, putting their marriage at risk. Julie felt lonely and started reaching out to her friends. She came home intoxicated on November 1. This is the 7th year of Tim's annual cruise tradition, which they had maintained since their wedding. This year, they decided to move the trip up to celebrate the Christmas holidays. The cruise was intended to strengthen Julie and Tim's relationship. They left Katie with her grandparents and flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, a man named George Skiadopoulos, who worked in the ship's engineering department, noticed Julie. Although he held a low-ranking position, he introduced himself as the captain. The next day, he had made a bet with a friend that he could start a romantic relationship with Julie. At just 22 years old and fresh out of college, George was at the beginning of his engineering career, but he looked respectable enough for Julie to believe him. He falsely claimed to be 28 and fabricated a few accomplishments to impress her. At that time, Julie was 29 years old, and she quickly became close to George. Tim noticed their interactions but was accustomed to Julie being friendly with strangers, so he didn't think much of it and felt no jealousy. Before a party, George offered Julie a tour of the engine room. During the tour, they shared a kiss, but nothing more happened afterward. When Julie returned home, she excitedly told a family friend about her feelings, thinking it was just a brief attraction, since she believed she would never see George again. However, not long after, George sent Julie a seemingly innocent letter, and they began talking on the phone daily. He tried to persuade her that Tim wasn't good enough for her. These conversations were not hidden from Tim. He caught Julie a few times while she was on the phone, but chose to trust her without questioning what they discussed. This situation left Julie feeling conflicted. She was torn between the stability of the family and new sensations with a young lover whom she missed so much, which caused her to become more distant from her husband and daughter. Noticing the change in her behavior, Tim grew concerned and wanted to mend their relationship. On January 3, 1941, he planned a surprise birthday party for her 30th birthday. The celebration went well, with many friends attending. During the party, Julie requested another cruise as a gift, specifying a particular ship and date. Tim was unaware of her true intentions to meet George again. He agreed to her request. On February 13, Julie went on a cruise where she met George. After some intimate moments and returning home, Julie excitedly shared her experience with her friend Tony, who is also the godfather of Katie. Although he was trustworthy, it was hard for Tony to keep this secret to himself. Feeling a deep longing for George, Julie decided to visit him secretly. She framed the trip as a vacation with her mother and daughter. She revealed to her mother about her secret relationship, which led to disapproval. But this could not stop Julie. Initially, the plan was for Julie, Julia, and Katie to go to Florida together. However, by March 26, she left them behind and traveled to Puerto Rico, where she betrayed love of her husband. Upon returning, Julie began to communicate more openly with George. She would frequently talk to him on the phone, send flirty love letters via email, and even create a video sharing snippets of her life. All of this she did without hiding it from Tim, with whom she still lived. Using her husband's earnings, she started going to parties and drinking regularly. Tim noticed these changes and suggested that they see a family psychologist after 7 years of marriage. One day, Julie expressed her desire to break up with Tim, but he opposed the idea. She owned a share in Tim's business, which was generating about $1 million annually. Julie was in dire need of finances as George was planning military service, which in Greece lasts 20 months. She attempted to help George obtain a visa to the USA, but by that time, she could no longer afford it. Struggling with emotional issues, she started taking antidepressants, which made George very angry, and he forbade her from continuing the medication. To impress her new boyfriend, Julie decided to get in shape. However, she had trouble sleeping due to taking sleeping pills and other strong medications, which led her to lose about 10 kg. She hoped to return to modeling to earn money, but George was very jealous and opposed her pursuing this career. Consequently, Julie had to abandon her plans. No one supported her relationship with this Greek man, not even Cheryl, who had previously shown interest in her. In a separate incident, Tim was unable to access a project document. When Julie refused to let him into her room, he had to call the police for help. Despite her resistance, he retrieved what he needed for work. Julie became paranoid, believing that Tim had hired a detective to spy on her. The tension in their home escalated, and it seemed inevitable that they were heading toward a divorce. By midsummer, George and Julie secretly got engaged while they were in the United States. This was done secretly, although she didn't hide from anyone that she was going to move to Greece. During this time, Tim started receiving monthly bills of $67 for international phone calls. Eventually, he discovered that she had been unfaithful to him by an engineer from a cruise ship, and they had been communicating with him behind his back. This revelation made Tim furious, and he decided to expedite the divorce process to eliminate any complications. In response, Julie attempted to restrict Tim's communication with Katie. She aimed to gain full custody so she could leave for another country without any obstacles, which Tim strongly opposed. While they was trying to resolve their issues, Julie's lover George informed her that he had quit his job and planned to visit her in New Jersey. During this time, Julie was under significant stress due to ongoing conflicts with Tim, which even caused her hair to start falling out. However, she believed that all this was due to separation from her beloved. Additionally, she became increasingly paranoid and jealous, demanding constant communication and obsessing over other women in George's life. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship took on a more chaotic tone. He frequently asked Julie for money, pressuring her to spend more than she could afford. Because of this, she was forced to take money from Tim, while she completely limited him communication with their daughter. Tim went weeks without seeing her, which drove him to frustration. Meanwhile, George constantly deceived Julie about his financial situation and employment status. It was surprising how unattractive this man was, the beautiful Julie, who literally crouched before him and was ready to give up her well-established life for him. Julie's friends and family were puzzled by her behavior. They tried to convince her to rethink her feelings, as they couldn't comprehend why she would fall for a bald, unemployed man with rotten teeth who was manipulative, deceitful, and excessively jealous. Despite their concerns, Julie seemed infatuated with him. She planned to use her divorce settlement to pay for a professional hair transplant for her boyfriend and fix her own teeth. When Tim learned about her plans, he was outraged, especially since he felt Julie was involving Katie in this situation. He threatened that if she attempted to leave, he would take Katie away, and she would never see their child again. This threat likely dampened Julie's enthusiasm momentarily. She even told her friends that she had ended her relationship with George. However, this was only a temporary setback. A few weeks later, she went to Greece with George to further develop their relationship. During this time, Julie met the parents of George, and they enjoyed the weekend. Because of the religious views of the boyfriend's parents, Julie was forced to hide her marriage and her daughter, as well as her modeling past. When she returned home, she dreamed of a future with her lover. On December 1st, she planned to leave Tim and their shared home. That day, she also left Katie and checked into a hotel. After using a significant amount of psychoactive drugs, Julie traveled to Greece on December 8, 1998. While there, she and her partner made plans for marriage and their life together. George convinced her to open a joint bank account, claiming she needed help with the language barrier. In her infatuation, Julie deposited $80,000 into the account and left an additional $18,000 in cash for expenses. This was all the money she had, and then she vanished without a trace. On January 8, George called Julie's friend to report that she was missing. He said she was supposed to meet him near McDonald's for a snack but never arrived, despite him waiting for several hours. At that time, they didn't have mobile phones to reach her. After a lengthy search, George contacted the police to report his fiancée's disappearance. Shortly before these events, Julie called her friend to express how much she missed Katie and to share that she was having issues with her fiancé, George. The friend sensed that Julie was considering leaving George, and she thought that Julie would return to the US soon. However, Julie never came back. Amid this, George's call was concerning. He informed her friend that Julie had disappeared and left her passport in the car, which the police later took. The problem was that George couldn't locate the officer who had taken the document, making his story seem suspicious. In response, the friend contacted Tim, who was the only one who could provide assistance. Tim quickly understood that Julie was in trouble. The last time she had reached out to her family in the US was on January 7, and since then, no one had heard from her. Julie's mother described George as pathetic. Not only was he unattractive, but he also seemed to lack self-control. There was an incident where George became aggressive towards Julie, when during an argument with Julie, he yelled at her, grabbed her by the throat and pushed her against the wall. He only released her when he heard the threat of police involvement. At this time, Julie attempted to end the relationship. Following this, Julia called the police, and George was deported. But then, despite the circumstances, Julie traveled to Greece to support her boyfriend. She defended him in every way possible, even taking responsibility for the attack. When she learned that Julie was missing, Julia suspected that her daughter's boyfriend was involved in her disappearance. George pretended to help with the search for Julie. During this time, Julie's family tried to reach the American embassy in Athens, but they faced a significant language barrier since no one at the Greek police stations involved in the investigation spoke English. In the United States, the FBI became involved in the case. It was revealed that Julie's passport had been with George the entire time, although he claimed he found it later. When George learned that the FBI was now investigating, he changed his story and said that Julie's documents had been stolen. His behavior grew increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unsuccessful. The couple was scheduled to get married on January 23, 999. During this time, news outlets were covering the story of the missing American woman. George became agitated when he spoke on the phone with Julie's friend, who had alerted the media, George insisting he was innocent. He even gave statements to the press and participated in interviews to defend himself. 16 days later, George, the main suspect, was in the interrogation room. He continued to stick to the story he had shared with the media. However, after 4 hours of questioning, the police got him to confess to killing his lover. He claimed that it was an accident. George seemed to genuinely regret the incident, even shedding tears during the interrogation. Despite this, his account was filled with inconsistencies. At times, he insisted that Julie had not disappeared, only to later admit his guilt and then deny any involvement again. George explained that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became unhappy and missed her home. She expressed a strong desire to return, and despite George's attempts to support her, her distress only deepened, which worried him. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Julie was constantly in tears. Furthermore, George's mother discovered that Julie had an ex-husband and a daughter in America, which made her feel disgusted with Julie. She openly expressed her disapproval to George. He was ultimately persuaded by his mother to leave Julie with such a complicated past. Their relationship was fraught with arguments, and they eventually were evicted from their hotel due to their conflicts. However, George exacerbated the situation. He prevented her from contacting her family and friends and physically abused her. It became evident that his mother struggled with schizophrenia and frequently required hospitalization. A lot of her issues seemed to have been passed down to George, who had an inflated sense of self-worth. As a result, he exhibited arrogant behavior. His manipulative tendencies were often noticed by friends and family. He disappeared at the slightest disagreement and immediately attacked his beloved. Besides, there was an incident where George's mother herself had a badly injured hand. But she justified herself by saying that she accidentally cut herself. Despite the abuse, Julie remained in the relationship. On January 8, 1999, the couple embarked on a long trip to Athens. As they drove along a deserted 2-lane highway, their calm conversation spiraled into another argument. George eventually stopped in a remote area of the road where they were isolated from other drivers. George got out of the car and immediately attacked Julie, choking her in an attempt to silence her screams. George later told the police that it felt like he was watching the incident from outside his body. He felt completely powerless and couldn't stop until Julie showed no signs of life. Although he claimed the attack lasted only a few seconds, forensic experts indicated that strangulation typically takes at least 3 minutes. Afterward, George was in shock and contemplated burning her body and scattering the ashes into the sea from a cliff, intending to jump afterward to be with her. However, he ultimately abandoned this plan. Instead, he found himself in an interrogation room, which revealed his guilt. George claimed he had tried to take his own life using an air gun, jumping in front of a truck, and through an overdose of medication, but he was unsuccessful. Following the murder, he treated her body with indifference. He placed her in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he purchased gasoline. He then returned to the scene, dragged her body away from the road near 2 small lakes, poured gasoline on her, and attempted to set her on fire. However, the fire didn't ignite because it started to rain. At one point, he thought about throwing her body into the lake, but instead placed the charred remains back in the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. George discovered a large suitcase intended for travel and decided to pack the body inside it. By this time, rigor mortis had already set in, and the body would not bend. Additionally, the head would not fit into the suitcase, so George resorted to cutting it off. He grabbed the head by the hair and raised it to the level of his face, and later confessed to the police that he was horrified by the sight of her vacant eyes. yet he still found her beautiful. He kissed her on the lips before placing the body into the suitcase. Afterward, he burned the suitcase and discarded it in a swamp, leaving the head behind. George then traveled to Kavala and threw Julie's head into the Aegean Sea. Tim and his family were informed of George's confession 19 days after Julie's disappearance. George, Julie's lover and intended husband, guided detectives to the murder site, where they discovered her remains. Tim traveled to Greece to bring her body back to her homeland. During this time, George confessed to the crime on live television. His mother suffered a stroke upon learning of his actions. Tim's father even remarked that George should have died alongside Julie. Despite this, many articles unfairly blamed Julie for the tragedy. Greek authorities described this murder as one of the most horrific cases known at the time. George's lawyers attempted to argue that he was insane, citing his mother's schizophrenia as a possible reason for his mental state. At one point, George expressed a desire for the death penalty, but Greece does not have capital punishment. In the United States, Tim became a source of support for Julie's family and friends. Despite Julie's infidelity, he proved to be a decent person. Friends of Julie, who remembered her fondly, believed that George initially exploited her for financial gain. When he found out that her husband was rich, he forced her to divorce for a tidy sum that the woman had to invest in his business. Before her death, Julie realized George's true intentions and decided not to invest in his projects, a decision that ultimately cost her life. George's trial began on November 27, 1999. Since 2009, cases in Greece have been heard by 3 judges instead of juries, which has expedited the justice process. Notably, no defense witnesses were present during the hearings. On December 6, the court found George guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it seemed that justice had been served, the Greek legal system faltered. In 2002, George appealed his conviction, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. His sentence was subsequently reduced to 23 years, and he was granted the right to appeal again. By 2007, he was released and now lives with his new family in Kavala. The case of Julie Scully is a heartbreaking tragedy, with haunting details of the complex relationship. From a happy marriage, she began an affair with George Skiadopoulos, which led to irreparable arguments and conflicts that eventually led to her death. The case is not only a story of personal loss, but also a reflection of the complex elements of love, trust, and power in relationships. The media and public continue to investigate to clarify what really happened, but the story of Julie will forever be a painful reminder of the tragic consequences of toxic relationships. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Robin Doan. This story takes place on a remote farm in a small town called Pampa in Texas, USA. 10-year-old Robin Doan was the daughter of Michelle Conrad. She lived with Michelle, her stepfather, Brian Conrad, and her older brother Zach. The family owned a farmhouse in the area, where Brian successfully managed a farming business. The children were raised in a peaceful rural environment. After divorcing the children's biological father, Michelle met Brian, a kind and pleasant man who quickly formed a strong bond with her children. Life improved for Michelle, and she eventually married Brian. The family had been living happily together for several years. By September 2005, Michelle was 6 months pregnant, and the whole family was eagerly anticipating the arrival of the baby. Brian, in particular, was thrilled at the thought of becoming a father. Meanwhile, Robin, a determined and resourceful 10-year-old, was living the typical life of a schoolgirl. She shared close relationships with her mother, brother, stepfather, and even her biological father, who occasionally visited her. Robin also spent some summers with her biological dad. On the evening of September 30, 2005, Robin went to bed as usual, but was suddenly awakened in the middle of the night. At first, she thought she was trapped in a nightmare when she heard her mother screaming and the explosion. It quickly became clear that this was no dream. Something terrible was happening downstairs. Overcome with fear but driven by curiosity, Robin got out of bed and moved to her bedroom door to listen. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, stopping right outside her room. The door creaked open, and Robin quickly leapt back into her bed, her heart racing. She lay perfectly still, trying to suppress her rising fear. Suddenly, the explosion shattered the silence. 2 bullets narrowly missed her, one passing just inches from her left leg and another near the left arm. The third bullet hit a nearby piece of furniture. In the darkness, the attacker didn't realize they had missed her. They then moved to the next room, where Robin's brother, Zach, was asleep. Moments later, more explosions echoed through the house, followed by a faint, heartbreaking cry from Zach. Then, everything fell eerily silent as the attacker left. Robin was frozen with fear, her body paralyzed. She pretended to be dead, using every ounce of willpower to stay perfectly still, too terrified even to breathe deeply, terrified that the attacker might return, notice her alive. In 2.5 hours of panic, she remained in that state, unable to process what had just happened. When she finally managed to summon the courage to move, there were no signs of the intruder. Summoning her strength, Robin cautiously got up. She grabbed her phone and called 911, though every step and movement was filled with dread that the assailant might still be nearby. Her voice trembling, Robin identified herself as a scared 10-year-old girl seeking help. Through tears, she told the operator she was cold and frightened. Between sobs, she explained that she had heard her mother screaming an explosion, but had been too afraid to leave her room to check on her family. She feared the worst, knowing hours had passed without any sound or sign of life from her loved ones. Robin eventually went to the kitchen and gazed out the window, anxiously waiting for the police to arrive. As soon as she saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars, she rushed outside to meet the officers. The little girl, visibly shaken and distressed, was escorted to one of the patrol cars for her safety. Meanwhile, several officers prepared to investigate the house, anticipating the possibility that the attacker might still be inside and ready to confront them. Inside the house, the police discovered a horrifying crime scene. The entire family had been brutally murdered. Brian had been attacked 3 times, Michelle 6 times, and even the family dog had been attacked twice. Robin's brother Zach was killed in his sleep, and one of the bullets struck him directly in the head. Michelle, who was just 2 months away from giving birth, was also tragically killed, and her unborn baby did not survive. Shell casings found at the scene matched a rifle, which was typically purchased through special orders or produced in limited quantities. Throughout this time, Robin remained in the patrol car, waiting for news about her family. She held onto a thin hope that someone had survived. When an officer returned and confirmed that the perpetrator had fled the scene, Robin felt a brief moment of relief. However, the devastating truth about her family's fate was soon revealed to her. Robin began crying again as she fully grasped that her loved ones had been killed. The police informed her that she needed to go to the station to speak with detectives. However, before leaving, Robin asked the officers to help her feed the animals so she could try to calm herself. During this time, she appeared detached from reality. While feeding her goats in the barn, she spoke as though nothing had happened, reminiscing about how she and her brother had won prizes in a competition. But then, she suddenly broke down again, crying as she grabbed one of the officers by the shoulder and desperately asked when her loved ones would come out of the house, The officer had to gently remind her once more that she was the only survivor of the tragedy. Robin was first taken to a nearby medical center for care. The psychologists were assigned to work with her, but this would take time. Doctors examined Robin and confirmed that she was physically unharmed. As a result, the police brought her to the station both to speak with her and to ensure her safety. Meanwhile, detectives understood they were dealing with a dangerous criminal and needed to act quickly to prevent another attack. Robin cooperated with the detectives and provided information to the best of her ability. However, Robin did not witness the events firsthand. Detectives initially suspected that her stepfather or mother might have had a serious conflict with someone shortly before the incident, but this theory was ruled out. Robin denied any such conflicts. Another possibility emerged, that someone in her family might have been involved with dangerous individuals or illegal substances. But Robin dismissed this as well. She couldn't think of anyone who might hate her family enough to attack them with a weapon. Although she described what she heard in great detail, she couldn't identify the attacker. She hadn't gotten a clear look, only catching a glimpse of a dark silhouette. As a result, she was unable to provide any useful description. The only thing she was certain of was that the attacker had light skin. One critical piece of information did stand out. Robin distinctly remembered hearing 15 explosions and confidently reported this number. She later revised her statement slightly, noting that there were clearly more than 10 explosions. When the crime scene was examined, investigators found shell casings confirming that exactly 15 explosions were fired. It seemed surprising that a 10-year-old girl, especially under such terrifying circumstances, could recall this detail so accurately. The situation remained unclear. No motive for the attack had been established, nor had the perpetrator's intentions. It was possible the attacker wanted to eliminate everyone in the household and leave no loose ends. There was even a risk that they might return to target Robin, the sole witness, to complete their plan. For Robin's safety, she will be placed in a specialized center for victims of violence. There, Robin was under the care of her biological father, stepmother, and stepsister, with police officers also stationed at the facility. Now, her father was the only person able to support and help her. He arrived in the middle of the night to pick Robin up, and after her interrogation was completed, they were immediately escorted to the center. Robin was informed that these precautions were necessary for her protection, and she was not allowed to leave the facility. She understood this, as she also herself feared another attack. Despite the restriction on leaving, Robin had to attend her family's funeral. She was allowed to go, but only under police escort. The funeral drew a large crowd from the nearby town, as many people knew the family and spoke about them fondly. In this small agricultural town in Texas, everyone was deeply saddened by the tragedy. For Robin and the mourners, the sight of the 3 coffins at the memorial was unbearable. No one could have imagined that these kind people could die so tragically. Detectives saw the funeral as an opportunity. The time and location of the service were not kept secret. In fact, the police hoped the attacker might show up. If the perpetrator planned to strike again, the funeral would have been the perfect moment. Law enforcement was fully prepared to act, closely monitoring the crowd while keeping a watchful eye on Robin, who was accompanied by her father, stepmother, and stepsister. But the event passed without any suspicious activity. By this point, forensic experts had finished examining the crime scene. They uncovered evidence that might assist in identifying the perpetrator, but no solid leads pointed directly to the murderer. Still, the findings were notable. Inside the house, they found shoe prints, and outside, near the house, they discovered tire tracks. The experts collected all the prints and carefully analyzed the tire tread patterns. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA belonging to the attacker were recovered. The lack of fingerprints led investigators to believe the attacker had worn gloves. The only blood found at the scene was that of the victims, suggesting the perpetrator was uninjured. It seemed the family was caught off guard and had no opportunity to resist or fight back. The back door of the house had been forced open, indicating a break-in. However, despite the presence of valuable items, including a wallet with cash, nothing was stolen from the home. Detectives determined that robbery was not the motive behind the attack. The assailant's behavior didn't match that of someone acting impulsively or under the influence of banned substances or alcohol. Instead, the killer acted with intention and precision, methodically eliminating the family members one by one. The police thoroughly investigated of Brian, Michelle, and Zach, but found no suspicions. No one had a motive, and everyone appeared to be kind, peaceful, and conflict-averse. Robin's biological father had been with his family in a nearby town, and his wife confirmed he was home asleep that night. Eventually, all leads came to a standstill, as no one in the family's circle seemed to fit the profile of a suspect. However, such a violent act targeting both adults and children suggested the possibility of a strong motive, such as jealousy, revenge, or resentment. The day before Robin's family was murdered, in the small town of Pineville, Missouri, relatives of the McCool family have attempted to contact them without success. By evening, worried relatives had arrived at the McCool family home. To their shock, the house was empty and surrounded by police tape. A neighbor informed them that a terrible crime had occurred. The night before, Orly McCool and Dawn McCool were killed by an unidentified attacker. At that time, forensic investigators were still processing the scene. They also questioned the relatives who arrived, but no one could provide any helpful information about a possible suspect. Inside the house, investigators found some unusual shell casings of an uncommon caliber, rare and difficult to obtain in the U.S. The following day, another incident in the same area provided a key lead. A local resident, Mr. King, returned to his home after being away for several days on a work trip. He discovered that his house had been broken into, his weapon safes had been forced open and emptied. Among the stolen items was a rare firearm in the U.S. along with ammunition. This strongly suggested a connection between the burglary and the murder of the McCool family. The assailant had likely stolen the weapon from King before committing the crime. Mr. King was thoroughly investigated, but he had a solid alibi. He was out of town at the time of the attack. However, several members of his family could have had access to the weapon. Among them, one person stood out: Levi King, the son of King. Levi was on the run, and family members suspected he was connected to the McCool murders. Thanks to Mr. King's report, detectives had a photo of the suspected killer. At just 20 years old, Levi was already well known to authorities due to his criminal history, which included serving time for burglary. A few years earlier, Levi had broken into a neighbor's house, stolen valuables, and set the property on fire. For this crime, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Just weeks earlier, Levi had been scheduled for transfer to another correctional facility. Desperate for freedom, he escaped during the transfer. Authorities in Missouri were certain Levi was extremely dangerous, armed, and ready to use his weapons at any time. Citizens were alerted through the media, and people were advised not to approach Levi if they encountered him, but to immediately contact law enforcement. Meanwhile, relatives of the McCool family reported several items stolen, including their Dodge Dakota pickup truck. The truck's details were entered into a police database, and a warrant was issued for Levi King's arrest in connection with the crime at the McCool residence. Although Levi King did not know any of the victims personally, he was on the run and needed resources, particularly a vehicle, to leave the state. Eventually, a suspicious young man was stopped by Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, near the Mexican border, likely attempting to flee the country. During the stop, the young man calmly admitted to having a weapon in his trunk. This led to a more detailed search. During the investigation, they discovered that the pickup truck he was driving was the McCool family's stolen vehicle. Levi was taken to the police station for further investigation. Law enforcement officers decided to question Levi further, and from the start, his behavior seemed odd. Within just 15 minutes of talking to detectives, Levi confessed to the double murder of Orly and Dawn McCool. Levi admitted he couldn't explain why he committed the murders. He said he broke into a random house on the outskirts of town to steal a car, driven only by an overwhelming and uncontrollable desire to kill. When Levi entered the house, he was unexpectedly noticed. A door opened, and a woman appeared, politely asking what he wanted. Levi claimed he was startled and panicked, so he grabbed his weapon and attacked her. Hearing the noise, a man came to investigate, and Levi, paralyzed by fear, also attacked him. After the killings, Levi fled in the pickup truck. Levi was soon extradited to Missouri, where local law enforcement questioned him further. During the interrogation, Levi once again confessed to the murders. Levi made an even more shocking confession. He admitted to murdering the Robin family in Texas. His confession matched evidence from the crime scene of the Robin family's triple murder, including matching shell casings found at both crime scenes. Levi described how he had attacked defenseless members of the Robin family, and upon hearing noises upstairs, discovered others in the house. Among them was Robin, who awoke to the explosion. Driven by uncontrollable bloodlust, the killer showed no regard for the victims' ages. Levi went upstairs, entered the bedrooms, and attacked the occupants in their beds to eliminate any witnesses. After committing these horrific acts, Levi fled the scene. After Levi confessed to the crimes, the police quickly contacted their colleagues in Texas to verify the details he had provided. Once again, his account aligned with the evidence. With this confirmation, Robin was finally able to feel some relief. She had been under immense stress for days, unable to sleep. The next day, investigators from Texas arrived to take Levi into custody. During the transfer, showing no remorse, Levi openly described his emotional state before, during, and after the murders. He admitted that the feelings he experienced during the murders were more intense and pleasurable than any banned substance. Even hours after committing the killings, he claimed he could still smell gunpowder, which gave him a sense of euphoria. In a formal, video-recorded statement, he detailed his actions, starting with the murder of the McCool family. Levi explained that his urge to kill coincided with his need for a vehicle to escape toward the Mexican border. Along the way, he felt another uncontrollable desire to kill and randomly chose the isolated home of the Robin family as his next target. Levi admitted that he did not know any of his victims, including the McCools or the Robins. Realizing the severity of his crimes, he understood he was now facing the death penalty. In an attempt to avoid this, he fled toward Mexico, hoping to disappear. In Missouri, Levi was charged with the double murder of the McCool family. Following his lawyer's advice, he accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. At the same time, hearings for the triple murder and attempted murder in Texas were approaching. Unlike in Missouri, Texas prosecutors took a firmer stance, refusing to rule out the death penalty or consider any plea agreements from the defense. The prosecutor was confident in securing a conviction that would ensure Levi could no longer pose a threat to society. However, death penalty cases often involve lengthy trials and require extensive preparation. Levi spent several years in jail without bail while awaiting trial in Texas. By the time the trial began, Robin, the sole survivor of the Texas attack, was over 14 years old. The hearings took place just before her birthday. On the eve of her 15th birthday, Robin was furious as she realized how senseless and brutal Levi's attack on her family had been. He had no motive and acted purely out of a desire to kill. Understandably, she strongly advocated for him to receive the death penalty. However, Levi's lawyer fought to save his client from execution. Opinions were divided. Some believed Levi did not deserve to live, while others argued that life imprisonment without parole was a harsher and more fitting punishment for his crimes. The defense attorney sought to present Levi King as a more sympathetic figure to influence the jury's decision. He emphasized that Levi had struggled with bipolar disorder since adolescence. Over the years, he had also been diagnosed with depression, psychosis, and schizophrenia. Levi was one of 7 children in a family where he reportedly received little to no love or care. His antisocial behavior was linked to an abusive, alcoholic father and a neglectful, indifferent mother. From as early as elementary school, Levi engaged in troubling acts, including arson, substance abuse, and killing animals for amusement. These behaviors seemed to reflect the dysfunctional environment he grew up in. Levi's abusive father was the first to frequently harm him and expose him to alcohol and banned substances. When police visited Levi's home, they were shocked by what they found. One wall was covered with ceremonial knives, swords, and weapons. Strangely, despite often struggling to afford food, Levi always managed to buy ammunition and weapons. Levi's obsession with violence contradicted the defense's claim that he was a good person, shaped by an adverse childhood and environment. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Levi King as a predator waiting for his chance to strike. They described him as someone who took pleasure in the smell of blood and gunpowder. The prosecution's main witness was Robin, the sole survivor of Levi's attack. The trial was a deeply traumatic experience for her. She was determined to confront the man who had destroyed her family. Up until that moment, she had been filled with anger and wished for his death. Later, Robin shared her story with journalists. She explained that when she first looked into Levi's eyes in court, she was struck by how empty and cold he seemed. As she saw his lifeless eyes, she forgave him. Robin realized it was pointless to waste energy on someone so devoid of humanity. She understood that Levi could not have become any other kind of person. After about 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that the death penalty was too harsh for someone as mentally handicapped as he was. They sentenced Levi to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Levi was eventually extradited to Missouri to serve his life sentence there. For a long time after the attack on her family, Robin struggled with severe psychological trauma. She frequently had nightmares, couldn't sleep well, and was unable to go outside alone. Even years later, the effects of her trauma would resurface. However, thanks to the support of her loved ones, she was able to overcome them. The case of Robin Doan raises many questions about the influence of psychology and deviant behavior. Gaming addiction and the use of high doses of antidepressants may be closely related to a number of factors that cause the psychology of people facing stress or psychological disorders to become unstable, leading to violent behavior. Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. On November 7, 2019, Marta Calvo Buron failed to show up for a scheduled meeting with her mother. Her phone was unreachable, and messages went unanswered. The last known trace of her was a live location she had shared from Manuel, a small town south of Valencia. At first, her disappearance seemed like a misunderstanding. Perhaps her phone had lost signal. Maybe she had decided to stay at a friend's house, or simply needed some time alone. But by the next morning, her mother's concern had turned into fear. What happened to Marta that night? Marta Calvo Buron, 25 years old, was the eldest of 3 siblings. She worked in the hospitality industry, but her real passion was in beauty, aesthetics. Together with her mother, Marisol Buron, she was planning to open a nail and beauty studio. They had already found a location, and the lease was ready to sign. It was a dream they shared, a symbol of their hard work. Hope for the future. Marta and her mother had an exceptionally close and trusting relationship. They spoke every day, exchanging calls, messages throughout the day. Marisol, a single mother raising 3 children while working as a warehouse supervisor at a supermarket, devoted her life to her family, especially Marta. She was protective but never controlling. Their bond was built on love and mutual respect. Nearby, Jorge Ignacio Palma, originally from Colombia, was living in Spain illegally. His criminal history was extensive, ranging from small-scale banned substances trafficking to involvement in large cocaine shipments, and his name was already familiar to law enforcement across several countries. Despite multiple arrests in Spain, Italy, he somehow managed to avoid deportation and continued his illicit activities. On the surface, though, he appeared calm, confident, and respectable, traits that allowed him to blend in, deflect suspicion. At first glance, Marta and Jorge seemed to exist in 2 completely different worlds. Marta was open, optimistic, and full of plans for her future, while Palma operated in the shadows, hidden from the authorities, connected to criminal networks, and accustomed to deceit. Marisol never imagined the danger lurking behind her daughter's new acquaintance. What began as a casual encounter would soon spiral into one of the most shocking crimes Spain had seen in years. Valencia, Spain's 3rd largest city, lies along the country's eastern coast, a vibrant hub of tourism, business, and culture. Beneath its bright Mediterranean charm, however, runs a darker current. Thanks to its port access and strategic highways, Valencia has long served as a major entry point for smuggling operations, including shipments of banned substances from Latin America. Beyond the city's lively plazas and sunny boulevards is a hidden underworld, a network of temporary apartments and illegal rentals, where undocumented individuals can live under the radar. It was within this shadowy space that Palma, despite his illegal status, moved freely, renting homes under false identities, forming connections, and staying one step ahead of law enforcement. About 60 kilometers southwest of Valencia lies Manuel, a quiet rural town of just over 2,500 residents. With limited infrastructure, minimal police presence, and a sense of isolation, it was the kind of place where someone could vanish, or make someone else vanish, without attracting much attention. Palma specifically chose a rented house there for its remoteness, knowing it would give him privacy and time. November 7th, 2019, began like any ordinary day for Marta. That morning, she texted her mother to cancel their planned meeting, saying she had another engagement. She told her mother that she was going out of town but didn't mention any names. Marisol didn't question it. She trusted her daughter completely. At 25, Marta was independent, smart, and responsible. Although her mother felt a pang of disappointment at the last-minute change, she didn't press for details. She simply wished her daughter a good evening. Visiting Manuel wasn't unusual for Marta. She occasionally met people through dating apps and had previously met Palma that way. When he reached out again, Marta agreed to meet him, feeling comfortable and in control. On the day she disappeared, Marta boarded a train from Valencia to Manuel. From there, she took a taxi to her final destination. Ever cautious, Marta sent her mother a message containing her live location. It was something she often did, just a simple way to reassure her mother that everything was fine. That single gesture would turn out to be vital to the investigation, pinpointing her last known whereabouts, a rental property quietly secured by Palma, who had gone out of his way to avoid drawing attention. The morning of November 8th, 2019, began quietly for Marisol. There was no message from her daughter, something that usually arrived like clockwork. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe Marta had been tired after the night out. Maybe she got home late and decided to sleep in. Still, as the hours passed and no reply came, Marisol sent another message. Again, no response. By afternoon, Marta's phone was unreachable, and her WhatsApp messages remained unread. That's when worry began to turn into fear. Marta was always careful. If there was a delay, especially while visiting somewhere unfamiliar, she would have said something. The day dragged on in anxious silence. Marisol tried to stay hopeful. Perhaps Marta's phone had died, or maybe she had just lost track of time. But as night fell and the silence deepened, denial was no longer possible. This wasn't a simple delay. Something was terribly wrong. After 24 hours with no word from her daughter, Marisol knew she couldn't wait any longer. She decided to follow the only lead she had, the geolocation Marta had sent before disappearing. It led to a specific address in the quiet town of Manuel. Determined, she went there herself. When she arrived, she knocked on the door. A man answered. It looked composed, even polite, but his eyes flickered uneasily, never meeting hers for long. That man was Palma. Marisol asked him directly if he had seen her daughter, explaining that Marta had shared this address before going missing. Palma denied everything. He claimed he didn't know anyone by that name, said no one had visited him, and insisted he'd been alone all night. His manner was polite, but there was something cold and evasive about him. He seemed anxious to end the conversation. Marisol pressed further, hoping there had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps he had seen someone who matched Marta's description, but Palma just repeated his denial. Deep down, Marisol felt this man knew something. She didn't have proof. She didn't have authority. But she had a mother's intuition, and every instinct screamed that this stranger was lying. That same day, she reached out to Marta's closest friends. She showed them the address from the message Marta had sent. One friend recalled Marta mentioning a man she had met online, a man who lived outside the city. but she hadn't shared his name. With no new information and no one else to turn to, Marisol went straight to the Valencia police station, hoping to find help. Marisol reported Marta missing after not being able to reach her for over a day. However, the police require a 48-hour waiting period before investigating a missing person case. The officer explained that Marta was an adult and had the right to disappear. Unless there was evidence suggesting she was in danger, they couldn't investigate it as a crime. Marisol tried to explain. This wasn't like her daughter. Marta always called, always answered her messages. She never vanished without a word. Not for hours, let alone a full day. This wasn't independence. This was a warning sign. But the officer dismissed her concern. To him, there was no crime, and without that, there would be no investigation. Not even a visit to the address her daughter had sent. Marisol refused to give up. She pushed back, demanding that her report at least be formally filed. The officer reluctantly agreed, but the document he produced was bare bones, missing crucial details, such as her visit to Palma's house, his suspicious behavior, and the geolocation Marta had voluntarily shared before vanishing. No visit to the property, no phone calls, no follow-up, nothing. The police simply logged the case as a routine report and told her to wait. Marisol left the station in disbelief, not just because her daughter was missing, but because of the indifference she had just encountered. The system that was supposed to protect her had turned its back when it mattered most. Realizing that waiting could only make things worse, Marisol decided to act on her own. While continuing to pressure the authorities, she filed multiple reports with different departments, called daily for updates, and insisted the case be treated as urgent. But the response never changed. Bureaucracy held firm. Without concrete evidence that Marta's disappearance involved violence or foul play, her case remained a low priority. Days slipped by. Marta's phone stayed off. Her messages remained unread. And while the police hesitated, Palma had exactly what he needed. Time. Time to erase traces. Time to plan his next move. Eventually, under mounting public pressure, and thanks to Marisol's persistence, the case was transferred to Spain's Guardia Civil, the national law enforcement agency. The new team immediately changed course. They began a full investigation, starting with the location Marta had sent before disappearing and retracing her final steps. Agents went to the property in Manuel, the same address tied to Palma. Even from the outside, the house gave off an eerie sense of concealment. The shutters were closed tight, curtains drawn, no sign of life within. When officers knocked and asked to enter, Palma refused, citing his legal rights. The standoff caused delays, but with a formal complaint on record and probable cause established, investigators obtained a search warrant. What they found inside was deeply unsettling. The kitchen and bathroom reeked of disinfectant. Every surface had been scrubbed. Tiles gleamed unnaturally clean. In one room, they discovered women's clothing, items that could have belonged to Marta. Outside, the trash bin contained paper towels marked with suspicious stains. Investigators collected everything: fabric fragments, hair strands, and biological residue. On one wall, faint reddish smears, possibly blood, became visible under specialized lighting. Every trace was carefully photographed and sealed for forensic testing. At the same time, the Guardia Civil's cyber and telecom units began tracing Marta's digital trail. Cell tower data confirmed what Marisol had feared. Marta's phone lost signal just meters from Palma's residence, the exact spot she had pinned for her mother on the evening of November 7th, 2019. Then, nothing. The pattern was undeniable. Marta had reached Palma's house and she had never left. With mounting evidence, the authorities officially reclassified the case. Marta Calvo Buron was no longer just missing. She was presumed the victim of a violent crime. Palma's behavior only deepened suspicion. His statements were contradictory, his timeline incoherent, and his alibi full of holes. He appeared tense, evasive, and manipulative. The investigation escalated swiftly. Forensic teams, crime scene specialists, DNA experts were deployed. What had begun as a missing person inquiry had now turned into a major homicide investigation, centered on Palma, and the chilling possibility that Marta's final moments had taken place within those freshly scrubbed walls. As suspicion tightened around him, Palma disappeared. His house in Manuel, Valencia, remained an active crime scene, but he was nowhere to be found. Investigators learned that shortly after his initial questioning, Palma had quietly left the property. He stopped answering calls, cut off communication with acquaintances, and avoided all familiar places. For almost a month, there was no trace of him. None of the addresses he had previously used showed any sign of life. Friends, neighbors, and former contacts hadn't seen or heard from him. Authorities were convinced he was deliberately hiding, doing everything possible to avoid being captured as the investigation closed in. Then, on December 4, 2019, something completely unexpected happened. Jorge Ignacio Palma walked voluntarily into a Guardia Civil station. After weeks in hiding, his sudden reappearance baffled investigators, and what he said next stunned them even more. He claimed he wanted to confess. During questioning, Palma offered his own version of events. According to him, Marta Calvo had died of an accidental overdose while the two were together at his home. He stated they had both consumed illegal substances voluntarily and that her death was sudden, without any signs of violence. He said, overcome with panic, he didn't know how to react and decided to dispose of her body. Palma told investigators he had dismembered Marta's body in the bathroom, using whatever tools he could find. Before disposing of the remains in trash containers scattered across different towns in Valencia, he insisted he acted out of fear and shock, claiming he never meant to harm her, admitting only to concealing the body, not causing her death. From the very beginning, investigators doubted his story. His explanation lacked credibility. His behavior after the incident, destroying evidence, fleeing, and refusing to cooperate, didn't match that of a man overcome by panic after a tragic accident. On the contrary, the calculated manner in which he hid the body suggested preparation, consistency, and method, clear signs of intent rather than impulse. Forensic experts also questioned the plausibility of an overdose without visible symptoms. Moreover, without a body to examine, a full autopsy was impossible, creating the greatest obstacle to uncovering the truth, leaving Palma's version entirely unverified. Digging deeper into Palma's background, investigators uncovered his long criminal record, his history of banned substances trafficking, and prior suspicions of violent behavior, all of which further eroded his credibility. His so-called confession didn't close the case. Instead, it triggered a much broader and more intense investigation into his involvement in Marta Calvo Barón's death. When Palma's photograph was made public, it unleashed a wave of new testimonies. Women who had never linked themselves to Marta's case began contacting the police. One of the first was a woman named Arlene. After seeing Palma's face on television, she decided to speak out. She described a terrifying encounter after meeting him through an escort website. Palma had brought cocaine, pressured her into taking it at his home, and then attacked her. Despite her resistance and even her unconsciousness, he showed no concern for her condition and later dropped her off as if nothing had happened. After the first woman came forward, others followed. Several more victims reported similar experiences to the Guardia Civil. Though the details varied, the similarities were striking. Palma followed a disturbing pattern, targeting women, arranging meetings at his residence, pressuring them to use banned substances, and then acting with violence. In nearly every encounter, the women's safety and lives were placed in serious danger. These statements were crucial in broadening the accusations against Palma. They indicated that he intentionally chose his victims and repeatedly used the same methods. The investigation into Marta's disappearance uncovered two previously unrelated deaths, both now suspected to be linked to Palma. Arlene Ramos, 32, a Brazilian woman, died in a hospital after a man dropped her off and quickly left. While her death was initially thought to be a cocaine overdose, her medical records showed injuries that didn't match an accidental overdose. Security footage and vehicle records later confirmed that Palma was the man who left her at the hospital. Marcela Vargas, 26, a Colombian national, was found dead in a rented apartment. An autopsy revealed banned substances in her system and evidence of physical violence. Phone records later showed Palma was the last person she contacted before her death. Both women had worked as escorts. These two deaths happened before Marta disappeared. But at the time, police didn't realize there was a connection. It was only after Marta's case received widespread media coverage that the similarities became apparent. What initially seemed like unrelated incidents were now recognized as a disturbing pattern. For many years, Palma has followed a certain pattern. He targeted women, especially those advertising escort services online. In each instance, Palma allegedly gave the women cocaine in capsules. These capsules were meant to be inserted internally, which caused a fast and extremely strong reaction. This often resulted in the women becoming unconscious or losing control. Medical reports, including those from Arlene Ramos's case, showed that the women had dangerously high and potentially fatal levels of cocaine in their bodies. Even for people who regularly use the banned substances, this indicated a deliberate and methodical approach. Authorities believe Palma followed a calculated system, not acting on impulse. He appeared to have developed a low-risk strategy for overpowering his victims, repeating the same behaviors without adapting to individual situations. Confident in its effectiveness, the trial of Jorge Ignacio Palma, started in 2022, immediately became a major national news story. The courtroom was packed with media, including live broadcasters and many reporters. Public interest groups were also closely watching the proceedings, creating a tense atmosphere. However, the most impactful parts of the trial were the testimonies of the survivors and Marta's mother, Marisol. Survivors, many of whom had never shared their experiences publicly, gave detailed accounts. These accounts highlighted Palma's detached and unemotional behavior and his lack of compassion. Although the events happened at different times and places, the survivors' stories were remarkably similar. Marisol delivered a powerful testimony. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, her voice steady, her grief unmistakable. She didn't ask for revenge, but demanded truth and justice. Prosecutors referred to her statement as a central piece of the case, giving emotional weight to the hard evidence. Palma's defense was contradictory. He admitted to meeting Marta and using substances with her, but insisted her death was the result of an accidental overdose. Regarding the other cases, he claimed all encounters were consensual, and the outcomes tragic but unintended. His legal team tried to portray him as cooperative, but the evidence painted a different picture. The prosecution brought forward multiple charges. Each accusation was supported by documentation, forensic reports, message logs, geolocation data, and witness testimonies. The case revealed an undeniable truth. Jorge Ignacio Palma was not a man who had made a single mistake. He was a man who had caused harm systematically. Over time, prosecutors argued that this made him a continuous threat to society and fully justified their request for the maximum possible sentence. Throughout the proceedings, Palma tried to portray himself as a man trapped by circumstance, overwhelmed, broken, and filled with regret. His emotional displays, especially when the name of Marta Calvo Buron was mentioned, seemed calculated, as if performed by someone playing a role rather than expressing genuine emotion. Palma denied all charges. He insisted he never meant to cause harm, that he was under the influence at the time. His story wasn't built on truth but on an attempt to manipulate public perception. Psychologists called to evaluate him reported signs of narcissism, manipulation, and a complete absence of empathy. At one point, he even shifted blame onto the victims, claiming that everything had been consensual, an assertion completely disproved by testimonies and forensic evidence. Experts described Palma as a man of contradictions. Outwardly, he appeared polished, polite, and confident, someone easy to trust. Each encounter was premeditated. He carefully selected his victims, targeting women in vulnerable situations. In May 2022, Jorge Ignacio Palma was found guilty on all counts, including the murders of Marta Calvo Buron, Arlene Ramos, Marcela Vargas, as well as the assaults of several other women. He was sentenced to 159 years in prison for multiple crimes, including murder, violent abuse, and offenses related to banned substances use and distribution. The court determined that Palma had acted deliberately, was fully aware of the potentially lethal consequences of his actions. Significant compensation was ordered for the victims and their families, including 640,000 euros awarded to Marta Calvo Buron's mother, Marisol, for emotional, psychological suffering. The court considered Palma's denial of responsibility, his blaming of the victims, and his complete lack of remorse as factors that worsened his crimes. These significantly increased his sentence, even when victims' bodies were missing or there were no eyewitnesses. Then, instead of wallowing in grief, Marisol transformed her pain into a meaningful purpose. She established an organization in memory of her daughter, Marta, to help families impacted by violence and to push for changes in the system. Now, Marta's name represents not only loss, but also strength, defiance, and the pursuit of justice. Marcela Vargas's murder left her children orphaned and unable to properly mourn her. Their lives were shattered. They lost their mother, their normal routines, and their sense of security. While relatives took them in, nothing could truly replace their mother's love. Government support is scarce. Moral support is almost non-existent. Some were too young to grasp what had happened, while others would forever be scarred by that fateful night. Their sorrow was intensified by constant court appearances, interviews, and media attention. These families didn't just lose loved ones. They were pulled into the eye of a tragedy that left lasting scars, especially on the children forced to grow up too soon, forever marked by Palma's crimes. Even though Jorge Ignacio Palma admitted to dismembering Marta and hiding her body, she has never been found. Police searched extensively, including going through trash and landfills, but found nothing. The most devastating aspect for her is that Marta's body was never recovered. The lack of a place to mourn Marta continues to deeply affect Marisol, leaving her with a grief that time cannot mend and preventing her from finding peace. Marisol Bond continues her fight to bring her daughter home, even if only to give her a proper burial. For her, it's not just about closure, it's about restoring a sense of dignity, of final justice. Police have confirmed the investigation remains open and search efforts are ongoing, offering a small but vital glimmer of hope that Marta might still be found. The story begins with a young love, gentle, innocent. Their future seemed full of promise. But without warning, she suddenly disappeared, especially when her child was about to be born. What started as a missing person case soon spiraled into one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes the Dominican Republic had ever seen. This is the story of Emily Peguero, a story of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for justice that would shake an entire country. Emily was born on July 12, 2001, in Cenoví, a small town about an hour's drive from Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. She was the youngest child of Adalgisa Polanco and Gennaro Peguero. Even as she grew older, her older siblings continued to treat her like their little baby. constantly shielding her from life's hardships. Pretty, cheerful, and kind-hearted, Emily, with her signature dimples, dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. She wanted to help those who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Growing up in a humble household, she promised herself that she would work pro bono to bring justice to people like her own family. Emily was deeply empathetic and always sought to make the world a better place in whatever small way she could. The Peguero family lived in a modest house with shuttered windows, a flat roof, and a faded butterfly mural painted across the front wall. Her parents worked multiple low-paying jobs just to make ends meet. Despite the lack of luxuries, Emily was always provided with what mattered most: love, care, and a sense of security. The family's financial struggles never dimmed her spirit. She is very good at studying, friendly and outgoing, enjoys spending time with friends and family. Emily enjoyed applying stage makeup, dressing up in costumes, and putting on little performances to make her loved ones laugh. For her parents, all the daily worries disappeared whenever they watched their youngest daughter dancing and smiling. The Peguero family might not have had much, but they were rich in love, warmth. That was enough. When Emily turned 15, she began dating a boy named Marlon Martinez, who was 18 at the time. They had known each other since childhood, and their relationship had blossomed from a gentle friendship into young love. Marlon had been born in the United States, but when he was around 8 or 9 years old, his family returned to the Dominican Republic and settled in a large house with a manicured front yard, directly across from Emily's humble home. His mother and stepfather were financially well off, sending him to a prestigious private school in the suburbs. Marlon's mother, Marlon Martinez, was a prominent political figure. At one point, she had even served as the deputy mayor of the province. At the time of the events, she worked for the government, handling visa and passport services and participating in various political campaigns. This position gave her access to influential people and powerful connections. Rumors circulated that Marlon often used her authority to help certain individuals obtain documents illegally, that many people owed her favors. She was never held accountable, as there was always someone protecting her from the consequences. To be honest, Marlon was not a pleasant woman. Emily's father, who had once worked as a private security guard for her, knew firsthand how aggressive, short-tempered she could be. She acted as if her money and influence placed her above everyone else. The townspeople whispered behind her back, calling her the devil for her arrogance. Cruelty, driven by political ambition and career demands, Marlon often needed help caring for her 3 sons, including Marlon. Instead of hiring a professional nanny, she turned to her neighbor, Adalgisa, Emily's mother, and paid Adalgisa to look after the boys while she worked. Every morning, Marlon would send her children across the street to Adalgisa's house, where they spent hours under her care. The children from both families quickly became inseparable, spending long afternoons playing together in the quiet neighborhood. The Martinez boys often slept overnight at the Peguero home, a sign that Marlon had great confidence in Adalgisa's care for her sons. Despite their stark social differences, the two families developed a surprisingly close bond through these everyday interactions. For years, all the children treated one another like siblings. But as they grew older, life slowly pulled them in different directions, and their once frequent visits became occasional. When Emily turned 15 and Marlon was 18, the two reconnected. At first, they were simply spending time together, reminiscing about their childhood. But soon, friendship turned into something deeper. As secret romances, the legal age of marriage in the Dominican Republic is 18, and Emily is still a minor. Her family disapproved, mostly because of Marlon's mother. Marlon was known for her arrogance and temper. She had recently quarreled with another neighbor over a trivial issue, further damaging her reputation. Yet Marlon himself seemed nothing like his mother. He was polite, quiet, and in a way, almost like a member of the Peguero family. Emily's father, Genaro, It does not like this relationship, but cannot stop it. His daughter was clearly in love, and he didn't want to push her away. However, deep down, Genaro still felt uneasy, mainly because he knew what kind of person Marlon was. By 2017, as Emily's 16th birthday approached, her relationship with Marlon seemed stable. They were young, happy, and hopeful about the future. But that spring, something unexpected happened. Emily began to feel unwell and didn't understand why. Marlon, being older, quickly realized what might be going on. A few tests later, their fears were confirmed. Emily was pregnant. The news shocked both of them. In the Dominican Republic, abortion is prohibited in nearly all circumstances. It's considered a criminal offense. And since 2012, anyone assisting in an abortion, doctors, friends, or family, can face prison time. Emily, terrified and confused, knew she would have to carry the baby to term. She herself was still a child. Not knowing how she could raise another child, Marlon tried to reassure her, promising that everything would be fine. But Emily was terrified to tell her parents. She didn't know how they would react. Disappointment, anger, shame. Eventually, she gathered her courage and confided in her mother and older sister. Her father, I didn't find out until much later. One afternoon, about 5 months into the pregnancy, Genaro came home during his lunch break. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed the uneasy looks on his wife's and daughter's faces. When he asked what was wrong, Adalgisa told him the truth. Their youngest daughter was 5 months pregnant. For a few moments, he couldn't speak. He was heartbroken, angry, and scared all at once. After half an hour of silence, he finally told his wife he would talk to the young couple, but that he needed time to process the news first. Tragically, Genaro would never get that chance. He learned about Emily's pregnancy just 9 days before she disappeared. About a week later, Roberto Cabrera, Marlon's stepfather, visited Genaro, suggested they meet to discuss the baby's future. Genaro agreed. Together with Marlon and Roberto, they sat down to talk. Marlon assured Genaro that he would take responsibility for the child and care for Emily. Roberto also promised to support the child in any way possible. That conversation eased Genaro's worries somewhat, though he still struggled to accept that his little girl was about to become a mother. He set one condition: Emily and the baby would stay with Peguero family after the birth. Since she was still a minor, both families would share the responsibility of caring for the child until Emily turned 18. Marlon seemed to agree, and Roberto supported the plan. But there was one person who was far from happy about the situation: Marlon. For her son's relationship with a poor teenage girl and pregnancy was not only inconvenient, it was an embarrassment she wanted to erase at any cost. She believed Marlon throwing his future away. In her mind, this child would ruin everything: his education, his ambitions, and the family's spotless reputation. Marlon feared what people would say if they learned that her son, from a respectable and well-off household, had gotten a girl from a modest background pregnant. She had tolerated their teenage relationship in silence, convincing herself it was just a passing phase. But pregnancy, in her eyes, was an unforgivable mistake. On the morning of August 23, 2017, 16-year-old Emily woke up earlier than usual. Adalgisa noticed and asked where she was headed so early. Emily smiled softly and said that Marlon had promised to take her to a doctor's appointment to pick up her test results. Adalgisa saw her to the front door, watched Emily get into Marlon's car and drive away. Completely unaware that it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive, the morning passed quietly. Adalgisa prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and waited for Emily to return. But as the clock ticked past the hour, a faint sense of unease began to creep in. Emily was always punctual, and if she were delayed, she would at least send a message or call. By late morning, Adalgisa's unease had grown into panic. At 11:30 a.m., Emily's sister received a strange text message. It said that Marlon had dropped Emily off at a gas station because she wanted to meet her uncle. The message should have been reassuring, but instead, it sent chills down their spines. Emily never sent texts. She preferred voice messages, and she had never mentioned meeting her uncle before. Even the tone of the message was off. It didn't sound like her at all. Something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Adalgisa sent her older daughter to Martina's house. When Marlon opened the door, he appeared calm and explained that on their way to the clinic, Emily realized she had mixed up the dates. The test results wouldn't be ready until Friday. According to him, Emily then asked to be dropped off at a gas station because she was meeting her uncle. He said he gave her some money, watched her get in the car and drive away. That, he said, was the last time he saw her. But Adalgisa didn't believe him. Together with her elder daughter, she rushed to the gas station and asked the employees to review the security footage. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. There was no sign of Emily or Marlon at the station that morning. Either Marlon had made a mistake, or he was lying. Yet, when confronted again, Marlon stubbornly repeated his story. By the afternoon, Adalgisa's panic had turned into full-blown terror. She called the police to report her pregnant teenage daughter missing. The family began printing and distributing flyers with Emily's face, hoping someone had seen her. Deep down, though, they didn't believe she had been kidnapped by a stranger. They were certain the answer lay much closer to home, with Marlon and his mother. When speaking to reporters, Adalgisa didn't hide her suspicions. Her husband, Genaro, had recently discovered disturbing messages on Emily's phone, texts from Marlon's mother, sent 4 days before Emily disappeared. The messages showed that she had been pressuring Emily to terminate her pregnancy, offering to help her end it quietly at home. She promised that everything would go smoothly, that Emily had nothing to fear. Emily initially refused, but after days of emotional pressure, she seemed to give in, agreeing to let Marlon assist her. For Emily's parents, those messages were proof of a sinister plan. They believed Marlon was desperate to erase the shame of an unplanned pregnancy, no matter the cost. When Genaro handed those messages to investigators, suspicion toward the Martinez family intensified. What shocked everyone most was that Marlon immediately hired a lawyer, something no innocent teenager would do. The gesture spoke volumes, suggesting guilt, not grief. After the first 24 hours passed with no sign of Emily, fear spread throughout the neighborhood. Rumors began to swirl. Everyone whispered that the Martinez family had something to do with her disappearance. At home, Genaro was a man shattered. He couldn't stop imagining what might have happened to his daughter, whether she was cold, hurt, or terrified somewhere. Calling out for help he couldn't give. Alone, he cried quietly, his body trembling with despair. But in front of his family, he forced himself to stay strong. He knew that if they saw him break down, their hope would shatter completely. After news of Emily, the missing pregnant girl, spread throughout the community. Rumors of her boyfriend's family's involvement began to circulate. Marlon and his mother decided to hold a press conference to deny the rumors and clear their name. Using her wide network of contacts, Marlon invited several reporters to attend, hoping to quickly put an end to the public suspicions surrounding her family. The conference was held in the living room of the Martinez family home. Marlon appeared in a simple t-shirt and jeans, visibly uneasy. Throughout the interview, he kept his head down, his hands trembling as he spoke. His mother, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Elegantly dressed in a formal suit, with her hair perfectly styled, exuding confidence and authority. Having previously served as a deputy and local government official, she was accustomed to addressing the public. Even so, the first questions were directed at her son. Marlon recounted the same story he had told before. Then, for the first time, he looked straight into the camera and pleaded for Emily to return home. He admitted that, like any couple, they had problems, but insisted that their families had accepted the unexpected pregnancy and were excited for the baby's arrival. After he finished, Marlon took over the conversation, firmly denying every accusation against her family. She claimed that neither she nor her son had anything to do with Emily's disappearance, asserting that on that same morning, Marlon had accompanied Emily's grandmother to the consulate to handle paperwork, an attempt to present an alibi, and emphasize how close the two families supposedly were. During the press event, Marlon repeatedly stressed that Emily was like part of their family, and that they loved her deeply. She referred to Emily as the girl who carried her future grandchild, saying they were as worried for her safety as the Peguero family was. However, instead of clearing their names, the press conference only raised more suspicion. People found it odd that the Martinez family had not invited the Peguero family to speak as well. To the public, the event seemed less like a genuine plea for truth and more like a staged attempt at self-defense. Viewers also noticed a chilling detail. Both mother and son spoke about Emily in the past tense, as if they already knew she was dead. This small but telling slip convinced many that they knew far more about what had happened than they were admitting. Soon, public opinion turned completely against them. Many came to believe it was a classic case of a wealthy, powerful family silencing a poor young girl to protect their reputation. Instead of calming speculation, the press conference had only fueled the outrage. Despite the mounting tension, Marlon decided to visit the Peguero family home. Seeing their grief-stricken faces, he realized there was no escaping the situation. Feeling cornered, and fearing what would come next, he went to the police and turned himself in. On August 26, 2017, Marlon Martinez was officially arrested as the main suspect in Emily's disappearance and placed in a detention center. But the most crucial question remained unanswered. Was Emily still alive? 5 days after Emily went missing, on Monday, August 28, police had a breakthrough. They managed to trace Emily's phone signal to an apartment in the upscale San Francisco de Macorís district, an apartment belonging to Marlene Martinez. When officers conducted a search of the premises, they made a disturbing discovery: blood stains on a mattress and several blood-soaked towels. All the evidence was immediately sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. Everything now pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. Whatever had happened to Emily, it had happened inside that apartment. Meanwhile, the police continued questioning potential witnesses. August 30th, 2017, the security guard of the apartment building where the Martinez family owned a flat revealed shocking information. He said that on the day Emily disappeared, August 23rd, he saw Marlon Martinez on the surveillance cameras carrying a large bag out of the building and loading it into his car. Unsure of what to do, the guard decided to call Marlon. She came downstairs to see the footage for herself. While watching the video, she became visibly nervous. A short time later, the recording mysteriously vanished. Later that same day, Marlon confessed everything to the police. The Peguero family's worst fears were confirmed. Marlon admitted that Emily was dead. He told investigators that he had left her body at a local garbage dump. The news devastated not only Emily's loved ones but also the entire community. Many people followed the story, hoping that Emily was still alive. But Marlon's confession completely extinguished that hope. Police officers, along with Marlon, immediately went to the dump he had mentioned to search for Emily's body. When the patrol car stopped near the landfill, it was surrounded by an enraged crowd. People wanted to see the accused face to face and express their fury. Grief. Officers had to fire warning shots into the air to disperse the mob. The police decided it was too dangerous to let Marlon out of the vehicle. For more than 8 hours, they sifted through piles of trash and debris, but found nothing. The next morning, August 31, 2017, the residents of Senevi took to the streets in protest at around 9 a.m. They blocked the roads, burned tires, and threw stones. demanding that Marlon stop playing games with the Peguero family's emotions and reveal the truth about where he had hidden Emily's body. The situation became so violent that police had to intervene to restore order. Public anger continued to grow, and much of it was directed toward Marlon's mother. Many people saw her as the mastermind behind Emily's disappearance. Those who knew the Marlon family were convinced that Marlene was using her wealth and influence to protect her son. Later that day, the prayers of Emily's parents and the townspeople were finally answered. A body had been discovered in Espaillat province, about an hour's drive from Sinovi. Emily's older brother received a flood of messages from friends and strangers alike, all saying that the body of an unidentified girl had been found nearby. The police, along with the Peguero family and relatives, rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. By the time they arrived, darkness had fallen. The only light came from police vehicles and flashlights. A crowd had gathered by the roadside. In the center lay a suitcase. Inside was the decomposing body of Emily Peguero, the 16-year-old who had been 5 months pregnant. The suitcase was opened. The body was carefully removed and transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy was carried out promptly. It revealed that Emily had died from internal bleeding, likely caused by a failed attempt to terminate her pregnancy. She had also suffered a severe blow to the head from a blunt object. According to the forensic report, death had been almost instantaneous. She probably never had time to understand what was happening to her. When the autopsy results were made public, outrage erupted across the Dominican Republic. By that time, Emily's story had gone viral. Her photos, smiling in a red traditional Dominican dress, flooded social media. The tragedy captured worldwide attention, with celebrities sharing Emily's image and urging justice for the young girl. Her family has launched a campaign demanding the case not be buried or forgotten. Communities united to pressure the authorities and ensure that justice would prevail. Emily was laid to rest in a white casket, surrounded by hundreds of mourners holding pink balloons. Many brought flowers and small gifts to honor her memory and to support the grieving Peguero family. Meanwhile, police investigations revealed that Marlon had lied from the very beginning. He had never taken Emily to the gas station, as he had told her mother and the reporters. The text message sent from Emily's phone that morning was fake, written by Marlon himself to cover up what he had done. Instead of taking her to the clinic, Marlon drove Emily to his mother's empty apartment. There, he allegedly forced her to drink an unknown liquid intended to end her pregnancy. The substance caused internal bleeding. Emily began to panic. She may have tried to resist or escape, but in the struggle, Marlon shoved her too hard. Emma fell, struck her head, died almost instantly. Panicked, Marlon placed Emily's body in a large bag, carried it out of the apartment, and loaded it into his car. Surveillance cameras captured him at that moment. He drove aimlessly for a while. Then, in desperation, threw the bag containing Emily's body from a bridge into a ravine. Afterward, he called his mother and confessed what he had done. Marlon was furious at him for handling the matter so carelessly. She promised to fix the situation and help make sure the body wouldn't be found. Later that same day, when the apartment building guard called and showed her the surveillance footage, she realized this evidence could destroy them both. From that point on, Marlon used all her influence to protect her son. Early on the morning of August 24th, Marlon met with her son and 2 accomplices to decide what to do with Emily's remains. Furious that Marlon had left the body in such an obvious place, she paid a man to help relocate it. The man went to the bridge, retrieved the bag, placed Emily's body into a suitcase, and dumped it on a roadside about an hour's drive from Sinovi, hoping that by the time it was discovered, no one would link it to Emily's disappearance. In the following days, police arrested 4 additional people connected to the Martinezes: Marlon's brother, one of her close friends, and 2 employees. However, all 4 cooperated with the investigation, were later released after giving testimony. None were directly involved in the murder itself. Ultimately, Only Marlon, and Marlon Martinez, stood trial for the killing of Emily Peguero. The trial was as tense as it was emotional. During the 9 months that followed Emily's death, each court session brought new drama. Defense lawyers withdrew one after another. Outside the courthouse, local activists protested daily. Whenever Marlon appeared in court, she wore a bulletproof vest and helmet to protect her from the furious crowd that wanted vengeance. The tension was so high that, without that protection, the mob might have torn her apart on the spot. In court in April 2018, emotions inside the courtroom ran dangerously high. Emily Peguero's father, Genaro Peguero, was arrested after attempting to bring a firearm into the courthouse. His act was one of desperation. A heartbroken father who had lost faith in the system and could no longer bear the weight of his grief. When the prosecution decided to recreate the crime scene, they brought in the suitcase in which Emily's body had been found, along with her shoes and clothing. The odor of decay was so overpowering that the reenactment had to be conducted outdoors, in the courthouse parking lot. Under a scorching sun, prosecutors demonstrated how Emily's body had been folded and forced into the suitcase. For the Peguero family, watching this was almost unbearable. Already devastated, they were forced to relive the horror of how their daughter had been treated in death. Throughout the proceedings, the defense insisted that Marlon Martinez had never meant to kill Emily. But Marlon's story kept changing, each version contradicting the last. At first, he confessed to killing Emily and abandoning her body at the dump. Later, he claimed that Emily had taken a pill on her own, distraught over the pregnancy, and that her death was accidental. In a third version, he denied his mother's involvement altogether, claiming she didn't even know Emily was dead. These constant inconsistencies shattered his credibility completely. The Peguero family's attorney argued that when Marlon's attempt to induce an abortion failed, he panicked. Instead of taking Emily to the hospital and risking exposure, he decided it would be easier if she simply disappeared. He never expected her body to be found, nor the public to rise against him. The lawyer became a hero in the eyes of many Dominicans, boldly standing up to the powerful Martinez family and exposing their corruption. Of all the Peguero family, Adalgisa, Emily's older sister, suffered the deepest pain. She had once cared for Marlon and his siblings when they were children, feeding them, putting them to bed, and protecting them while their mother, Marlon, pursued her political career. For her, the betrayal was unthinkable. One of the very boys she had nurtured had grown up to take her baby sister's life. For the Peguero family, Emily's death was a devastating consequence of pride, class prejudice, and obsession with fame. The trial dragged on for months, every hearing more explosive than the last. In November 2018, a panel of 3 judges finally delivered their verdict. Marlon Martinez was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His mother, Marlon Martinez, was convicted of kidnapping and concealing a corpse, receiving a mere 5-year sentence. When the verdict was read, chaos erupted inside the courtroom. Angry shouts filled the air. People could not believe that a woman so deeply involved in Emily's disappearance would serve only 5 years behind bars. Protesters demanded that her sentence be increased to at least 20 years. But the court's ruling stood firm. Marlon's lawyer vowed to appeal, claiming he had never intended to kill Emily, that he had simply wanted to solve their problem, and things had gone terribly wrong. The Martinez family was also ordered to pay financial compensation to the Peguero family, though everyone knew no amount of money could ever make up for their loss. Then came another devastating blow. On May 15, 2019, the appeals court reduced Marlon's sentence to just 2 years, arguing there was insufficient proof that she had committed a crime. To the Peguero family and the Dominican public, it was an outrage. The injustice didn't end there. In September 2020, another ruling effectively ordered Marlon's immediate release. Many suspected her powerful political connections had influenced the decision. When she walked out of the correctional facility, a furious crowd waited outside. shouting insults and demanding retribution. But she didn't look back. Soon after, Marlon left the Dominican Republic and quietly resettled somewhere in the United States, far from the rage she had left behind. Meanwhile, her son Marlon remained behind bars, though even prison seemed to treat him gently. Rumors circulated that he had begun another relationship with a teenage girl and that guards occasionally allowed him to leave the facility unsupervised. Each new rumor was like another wound to the Peguero family's heart. For Emily's parents, nothing about the aftermath resembled justice. Their daughter, a bright 16-year-old who had dreamed of becoming a teacher, was gone. The people responsible for her death had managed to turn a story of brutality and loss into one more tale of power and privilege. Gennaro remembers how every morning before leaving for work, he would quietly step into his daughter's room, kiss her forehead, and whisper goodbye. It was a small ritual, something ordinary yet deeply precious. Now, that memory is what breaks him the most. In memory of his sister, Emily's brother wrote a 4-minute song recounting everything that happened to her. The love, the betrayal, and the unbearable loss. In the music video, the final scene shows him watching Marlon Martinez on television, pretending to cry at a press conference. Without saying a word, the brother stands up and smashes the TV screen. This action is a powerful symbol that reflects the anger and sadness felt by people across the country. Emily's bedroom remains exactly as she left it before her death. Red paper hearts are still taped to the headboard. Neon pink curtains flutter softly by the window. On her bedside table rest a few handmade bracelets, a small statue of Jesus, and a framed photo of the Pope. Inside her closet, her neatly folded clothes sit beside her collection of stuffed animals. The only new thing in the room is a collage of photos and farewell messages created by students from her school, a tribute to a young life stolen too soon. Across Latin America, femicide has reached devastating levels. Every year, around 200 women are murdered in the Dominican Republic alone, and that's only the official number. Many cases go unreported, buried in silence and fear. While police were searching for Emily's body, they discovered the remains of 2 other young women, both just 18. One was killed by her stepfather, the other by her boyfriend. Emily Peguero's death was only one among countless tragedies, but the brutality of her murder and the involvement of a politically connected family shook the entire nation. Her story represented resistance, grief, and the urgent need for justice in a society that frequently ignores such issues.